Thank you. Good evening. I would like to call this regular meeting of the Board of Education to order. The next regular Board of Education meeting is on Tuesday, June 8th at 7:30 p.m. in the board meeting room. Good evening. Thank you all for joining us out there in Zoom land. Spring is here. It almost feels like summer's here on occasion too. I'll keep my comments brief as we have a big agenda today. So just a thank you to all those that participated in Saturday on the Oxbridge building ceremony. I've seen some of the pictures and the video, and I think it was a great way to celebrate that project, which continues to be on schedule and under budget. And I think the best picture of the day was the picture of the kids and their shovels in the pile of dirt with the superintendent. So I think the school's being built for our kids, and it's just a great project that continues to move forward. So I was happy to celebrate that with the town, the board, and the community. So thank you for all those that participated. And just as the school year comes to an end, just continue to be safe and continue to be smart. All the numbers and the statistics around COVID seem to be pointing in the right direction. And so hopefully we'll have a good end of the school year. So with that, I will turn it over to public comment. Michelle?
Good evening. If you would like to make a comment, please use the raised hand icon. Once identified by the facilitator, please state your name and address. You will have up to 3 minutes to comment. Natasha Rose, you are unmuted and recognized.
Hi, I'm Natasha Tomai, and I live at 6 McLaren Road South, and I have 2 children in Royal School. And tonight, I just wanted to make a public comment on the SCSSs being the new AP role, and that we have 3 candidates that are going to be recommended to the board tonight for approval. I know that there are 5 positions to fill here, and none of those names seemed like they came from within the district. So I'm curious why there weren't 5 coming tonight, why we weren't voting and looking at everybody together. And that nobody internally was qualified or was picked. My personal experience with the SCSS at my school is that there's terrific synergy and leadership there, and we do not have in my experience, and I've had 4 years of experience with PPT meetings and children with special needs, that there's such a solid team. And so for the continuity of parents who, next year I'm going to be on the PTO and representing, helping other parents who have kids with special needs. And it's important for us, it's important for me as a parent, when every day you don't know exactly what it's going to look like with your child, to have continuity. And I think that the people who already know your children, already know you, the personalities, have sat through the PPT meetings, who are putting the IEPs into place, who are setting up the ESY schedules. If there are people within the district that are qualified, have the leadership skills, have the support of the people around them, that I'd ask this board to please consider those last 2 positions. And I'll write a letter a little bit more specifically, but I think that, for morale in general, we have a terrific school system, and that the people who are really good should be retained, and that we should show the people who are really good that there are leadership and, opportunities to grow within the district rather than bringing people from without. And that's it. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Mrs. Rose, for your comments.
Would you
Have
ask
a good
her
evening.
would you ask her to repeat her address? Ms. Tomai, would you repeat your address, please?
Oh, Mrs. Rose, could you please repeat your address?
She's muted.
Yes, it is 6 McLaren Road South.
Thank you so much. Have a good evening.
You too.
There are no more raised hands at this time.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. We'll move on now to the superintendent's report. Dr. Adley.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for those who are tuning in from home. There's lots of exciting things happening around the district as we sort of wind down the school year the last couple of weeks. Just want to recognize five of our seniors. All 5 seniors were National Merit semi-finalists, and they have been moved on to be finalists. Nicholas Liu, Ethan Fox, Alexander Delvicchio, Vida Mahaltra, and Natalie Volz were the 5 students. Vida and Natalie have been named National Merit Scholars, and there are 2 additional rounds that they can consider for National Merit Scholars. So congratulations to all 5, and we wish them all well. And we're very proud of their accomplishments, as they should be, and their parents. The Achievers Night was celebrated for the Achievers projects. That was last evening, and it was well attended, and also it was tremendous to see the kids' projects on display, and it was also a nice opportunity to actually see their work this year without it being virtual. Again, as Mr. Chairman said, thank you to those town officials, legislators, board members, building committee members, staff, parents, and community members, and particularly the kids. As the board chair said, the kids made the day. That's why the building's going up. It was a nice day to do it, and so thank you for your availability, and thank everyone for the support of the project. The security grant, we have applied for the round 5 of the security grant issued by the state of Connecticut. I think in round 4, none of our districts, Durgay districts, received any funding, but we applied for that, and we'll see how that plays out down the line. The hiring process is well underway, as you know. This evening there are appointments to be made. They're also closing in on the elementary principals appointments, will soon become before the board, as well as the remainder of the assistant principals. Thank you to all of the staff and students they're in the middle of the testing season. Some of it's winding down. By this Friday, AP will be wind down. NGSS at the high school will be complete by Friday. We do have some makeups of SBAC, but particularly in this year for remain dedicated and focused during this testing window, which was actually pretty significant and much longer at the high school, particularly for AP. And again, there's a lot of activities going on around the school. It's nice to see around the district, and nice to see these activities being celebrated for our kids. And I wish good luck to the cast and crew of Something Rotting this particular weekend. We get a wee chance to see that. Theatre 308, and they are doing that outside too. That's quite a feat with staging and so on and so forth, but that will be a nice event over Memorial Weekend. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Dr. Adley. Any board committee reports? Approval of minutes. Thank you, Deb. It is requested that the board approve the following: minutes of the special meeting and executive session held on May 11th, 2021, minutes of the regular meeting held on May 11th, 2021, and minutes of the special meeting held on May 12th, 2021. Do I have a motion? Mrs. Parent, second by Mrs. Stein. All those in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you. Mr. Sini was not here.
I'm going to abstain because I missed the second executive session.
Thank you, Mr. Sini. Any board committee reports? Okay, moving on to presentations and discussions. We will move on to appointments, Middlesex Middle School principal and elementary assistant principals. Did you send these motions to me? Okay. All right. So I will make a motion. Can I have a motion to approve the appointment of Mrs. Carolyn Rodriguez to the Middlesex Middle School principal role? Mrs. Parent, second by Mr. Sini. All those in favor? That is unanimous. Mrs. Carolyn Rodriguez, I see you there on Zoom. Congratulations to your appointment. We're very excited to have you join the Darien District as the Middlesex Middle School principal.
Caroline, I think can you hear us?
I can.
Well, you've just been appointed, so congratulations. Caroline has been 6 years as the assistant principal up at the Lincoln School in Meriden, and her other 18 years have been steeped in middle school background and teaching and leadership at the middle school level. She's best known for her belief in students and their ability to succeed, and also in supporting teaching and learning for the staff. So she's recognized for exceptional leadership up there. We're delighted to bring her down to Darien. And with that, we offer you our congratulations. I don't know if you want to say a word or two.
Just thank you. I'm very excited and honored to work in such an exceptional district, and I am looking forward to working with the incredible staff, students, and families. Thank you very much for the appointment.
Mrs. Rodriguez, thank you and welcome aboard. Have a good evening, and we look forward to seeing you in the district.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, may I have a motion to appoint Victoria McVeigh as one of the assistant principals that will be within the elementary schools. Mr. Maroney, do I have a second? Mr. Brown, all those in favor? That is unanimous.
I'm going to abstain just because I wasn't at that meeting.
Okay.
Yeah.
That is everyone except Mr. Sini. He's going to abstain. Ms. McVeigh, congratulations on your appointment to the role of assistant principal within the district.
Victoria, you there?
Yes, I'm here. I can't start my video. Oh,
Okay.
here it is.
We can
Sorry
hear you.
about that. Hi.
Victoria, welcome and congratulations. That would have been tough if you couldn't start your video because you were in charge of remote learning last year. But congratulations. Victoria comes from Fairfield Ware High School for the last 9 years, where she's been a leader and facilitator of special education. And with that, I offer you our congratulations. If you want to say a word or two to the board and the community.
Yes, I would love to. First, I'd like to thank the board, Dr. Adley and the cabinet, Ms. Sion, and the building-based interview committee for the opportunity to participate in such an engaging interview process. I'm so excited to join a school community that is so committed to each and every student's success, and I'm thrilled to be part of such an innovative initiative. I look forward to working with all of you and to achieve Darien's district and building goals. And I just want to say thank you for everyone's time, and I am really looking forward to this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Ms. McVeigh. Welcome to Darien and the district, and we look forward to seeing you in the district. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Great. I will look for a motion to appoint Mrs. Leslie Davis to the role of assistant principal within the elementary schools. Mr. Brown, second by Mr. Maroney. All those in favor? That is everyone with the exception of Mr. Sini will abstain. Thank you. Mrs. Davis, congratulations. Welcome to the Darien School District. We're excited to have you on board. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. And again, I echo everything that Victoria said. It was an outstanding process to be a part of. And I'm incredibly excited to be joining Darien Public Schools. And I can't wait to work with students, staff, and families in the near future.
Thank you. Welcome aboard. We look forward to seeing you in the district. Have a great evening.
So Leslie comes to us just as a wee bit of background, if I may, for us. 26 years of instructional improvement as a teacher, and also in charge of elementary program at the elementary level, obviously with a tremendous background in special education leadership. So Leslie, welcome aboard.
Thank you so much, Dr. Adley.
Welcome. We look forward to seeing you in the district, as I said. Thank you.
You too. Have a good night, everyone.
Take care. Next up, we have Mrs. Lindsay Arenheim. May I have a motion to appoint Mrs. Arenheim as an assistant principal within the elementary schools? Mrs. Stein, second by Mr. Brown. All those in favor? That is everyone with the exception of Mr. Sini, who will abstain. Thank you. Congratulations, Mrs. Lindsay Arenheim. Welcome to the Darien School District. We're excited to have you on board.
Thank you. I can't see myself, but hopefully you guys can see me. I don't know why my video is not working either, but I just want to say, kind of quote what everyone else said. It's hard to go last, but I'm honored, that you chose me to be a part of this team, and I know that Darien is a district that's known for excellence, and I can't wait to come to your elementary schools and start building those relationships and working with students there.
So we're thrilled that you're joining us, Lindsay. Lindsay joins us from the Director of Pupil Services and Special Education up in Plymouth. And for the past 13 years, she has experience as a behavioral therapist, a clinician, and primarily as a school psychologist. So she brings a lot of expertise. And welcome aboard, Lindsay, and congratulations. And I don't think
Thank you.
Great. We look forward to seeing you in the district. Thank you. Welcome. Great. Thank you. And I know there will be more to come as the district continues to go through a very rigorous interview process, from my understanding, almost on a daily basis. So we've got a lot of candidates and a great process, as evidenced by the candidates that have become before us and that we've appointed. So welcome to all those folks that are joining the district. We're excited to have you on board. We're excited to see more candidates to round out as the process continues. Thank you. Moving along, Darien Public Schools current update. Dr. Adley.
Well, it continues to be encouraging news. Yesterday evening, we had one case. This was as of Friday, as the packet, when the packet went out. So obviously, we do have one case to report from yesterday. That will go out this evening. I have not received any notice of any other cases for this evening. So I just touch on the case metrics, and with the last prior case being April 28th, and no cases in the last month or so for the town. So the pattern is trending and has trended in a very positive direction. The vaccination clinics, I'll let Alicia's here, she can talk about those a little bit. The remote learners have dropped to a level of essentially the people who were remote for the most part. The outdoor masking, I think the board is familiar with that, and the community is familiar with that, working with our health professionals. We felt given the actual trend and given the actual numbers or lack of cases, that we felt that we could go to outside, and also outside without the masking. It also was just, it's easier to manage also, because there's so many outside variations of outdoor masking, that is also helpful in that regard. But it's also a very positive milestone that our children and our staff and our parents can be on campus without the mask in this particular case. So we're pleased about that. Certainly some parents have asked me and have communicated around, well, why don't you do it for the schools, inside the schools? I do not have an option. It is a requirement by the State Department of Public Health and the State Department of Education to continue the masking, and actually CDC to continue the masking inside. It's not even a recommendation, it's a requirement. So I don't really have that option, even if that was wanted to consider that as an option. But it's good to see students outside, staff outside, events outside. That's just very encouraging, and it's a very encouraging sign for the new year. And the American Rescue Act, I want to update the board on that as we go through. This speaks for itself a little bit. It's nice to see zeros on the board. It's also nice to see the map look a lot different, with and not many red towns in there. So, and you can see 0115 for the last number of weeks in the town. So those are positive, clearly. We just split this up because it was getting too hard to read just the full year together. But we'll go to the end of the year. There you can see how it's dropped off. I will say too, by the way, I've talked about the mask. The mask then wouldn't apply for. Prior to sending this out, we talked about graduations and so on having masks. They won't need to wear masks in graduation now, right? Given this particular application. So. I'll stop there before I talk about the American Rescue Grant. If there's any comments, questions, or otherwise about the first couple of topics.
Mrs. Ritchie.
So it's really just a comment and I guess food for thought, because I think we see the trends are getting so much better and there's so much optimism and hope right now. I think for me, I hope and I know the goal will be that masks are not on our children when they enter the school buildings come start of the new school year. So I think I hope that the guidance will change, and I'm hopeful that if we need to, we can put other mitigation strategies in place to keep our students safe. But I'm just feeling very positive, and I'm hoping the community is feeling positive and things are just moving in the right direction. So it's really just a comment.
Thank you, Mrs. Ritchie. Mr. Sini.
Along those lines, Alan, we don't have the opportunity to sit down with the medical experts or the State Department of Education, Department of Health. What are the metrics that they're looking for to relieve the kids of the masks indoors? are they giving you any sort of feedback? I mean, we're in this town, we're at 0 cases. We've been, maybe 1 school case in the last 3 weeks, 4 weeks. So do you have are you getting any sort of input from the experts?
I think our public officials, which includes Alicia to some degree, they're willing to make decisions where they have the latitude to make that decision. So they certainly had latitude because this was a recommendation for the mask. Actually, I'm not sure of any, as of last Friday, I'm not sure of any other school districts that are not wearing masks under any conditions outside. So our medical advisors in this case, because of the pattern that we have seen within town, and given us it's so low, thought that it would be, they felt safe about that. They felt that was a good decision, a reasonable decision, to actually not go along with the recommendation. But the requirement, they're going to have limited option there in terms of, certainly they would have an input into it, but as long as it's a requirement by the State Department of Public Health, and as long as it's a requirement by the State Department of Education, they're not going to have much say in that, to be honest with you. That there's little latitude there. I don't want to be seen to be going against the absolute requirement of the Public Health Department nor the State Department of Education. I don't think we want to be seen to do that. If there's room for latitude there as we go over the summer, then I think at least our public health officials have looked at each of the situations over the course of the past year, actually, and tried to adapt and be flexible and take a look at the town's metrics. That was the whole reason to do that. I still have a problem overall, though, with the State Department of Education in the sense of this is a local decision, but only under certain situations is it local. But that being said, while it remains a requirement, I don't think they're going to have much flexibility to do anything.
And if I could
Go
add
ahead,
one
Mr.
follow-up.
Cini.
And when maybe not our local health experts, but in your conversation with the state, I mean, do they weigh the pros and cons at all at this point, or is
They
it
are so I don't want to be disparaging. I don't mean, because they're doing what they're the best that they can do and respectfully, but they're still looking at what you want to do for graduation. I'm like, they're just steps behind, and that's just the way the bureaucracy works.
Mr. Brown.
Thank you. I actually had 2 questions for Alicia, if I may. The first is following up on Mr. Cini. Are you hearing anything from the State Department of Public Health in terms of what might change to get the masks off of our kids, was the first question. And the second, I'll just throw it out. From the 2745 that we had that were contact traced, do we know how many of those actually wound up having COVID? And if you don't have that tonight, I'm hoping we're getting near the end of seeing these numbers, so maybe we can get that later, but that would be the follow-up question.
To answer the first one, the State Department of Health hasn't given us any indication as to what it will take for the masks for kids to be removed. So we're just kind of waiting. I think part of the, it's an educated guess on why it's taking so long is that there are still schools that haven't opened across the country. And so they're trying to, they're working on getting those schools open, and I don't think that the vaccine rates of vaccination in those areas are as high as they are here. I think that we've had quite a bit of success. A lot of parents and kids are interested in getting the vaccine. I think, I just don't think that it's that across the country, and unfortunately those recommendations are coming from the CDC, and they're looking at the entire country and not looking at small pockets across the country. So I think that's part of it, but they've been very clear that schools have to remain masked. And then as far as the kids that were quarantined and the number of cases from the kids that were quarantined in class, I don't have the exact number. I think I've put that out before, but I think it's under 10. So not very many. So, myself, the other school nurse supervisors across the state, we're all hopeful that the contact trace and quarantining, even if we have to mask, that part will go away for schools. I would say if the numbers went up again and we were where we were sometimes, over the course of December and January, even into March, that what we really saw was that kids seemed to get COVID from either a family contact or their social contacts and not in school. So hopefully the school piece will go away as far as quarantining, but I think that any social or family contacts would require quarantining because we did see a lot of kids turn positive from those contacts.
Sorry, Alicia, the audio's a little bad here. Did you say
Oh,
it was?
no.
No, you're fine. The one part I missed was, did you say it was 110 or under 10? I didn't
Under 10.
Under.
Under 10.
Under 10.
Under 10.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Alicia, could you just speak to, please, the student vaccination clinics that for 12 and above? I think they're readily available, but would you just make a comment
Right.
or two?
So the vaccine is readily available. The clinic that's at the Lord and Taylor site in Stamford is drive up. It's run so well, and there's no appointment necessary. So, you can schedule an appointment, but you can go and then you just schedule your second appointment, or you just plan to go 3 weeks later around the same time, and they will vaccinate you there. And as far as I know, that is going to be maintained for a while. Greaves also is giving vaccines. You'd have to call them. I do think that they are scheduling through VAMS, which I found to be a little cumbersome for my own child. So, I can appreciate that can be a very frustrating endeavor. But I think that most people who wanted the vaccine have for their 12-year-old children and up, have been able to find it. And, I'm happy to help anybody who's having trouble. There's also through Yale New Haven and also Hartford Health, if you just go to their main web pages, it's very easy to navigate their system to get a vaccine in several different locations. You don't have to go to New Haven, you don't have to go to Hartford.
So Alicia or Dr. Adley, I'll ask the $1 million question. So we organize a communication to the state that based on our community and our vaccination rate and the fact that our kids have been together, we want our kids to breathe for the last 3 weeks, 2 weeks, or last week of school in June, and we want to push the envelope. What's the response from the state on that?
They would tell you to finish strong and remain in masks through the end of the year. So they've been very clear about that, and I don't see that changing.
Thank you. Mrs. Ritchie.
I wanted to give a shout out to New Canaan because we did participate in their clinic that they had, and it was really well run, and I appreciate that they opened that up to non-residents as well. I just wanted to thank them for that because it was really amazing how well that clinic was run. So thank you to New Canaan.
Thank you for that, Mrs. Ritchie. Any other questions around this before Dr. Adley moves into the next phase? All right. Alicia, thank you so much again for your time and for all your hard work, and the whole team of nurses, the whole staff. Thank you again for all the hard work.
You're welcome, and thank you.
Thank you, Alicia. So there is a separate memorandum that accompanies the American Rescue Act. So this sort of is the next iteration or the next sort of level of discussion. I will share that the reopening plan is sort of the State Department of Education is not necessarily requiring, at least they haven't said so, a reopening plan, but the American Rescue Act requires the reopening plan, so it's one and the same. Again, I'm looking at this reopening plan just as a piece of information to the board as being as short as I can make it, in the sense of we're open as normal as we can, and so that's the shape that it will take. But that is due on June 22nd. It needs to be posted on the website. That's really the requirement. And that the plan for spending for the American Rescue Act is due in August. So this is the discussion we're having now. So you should also know that there's required stakeholder feedback about the plan. It's very loosely described of what required stakeholder feedback actually means. This is one of this qualifies as a requirement, as do the meetings with the administration, as do meetings with teachers, and parents have an opportunity to participate. So I would be looking at the processes we're using right now as a definition of how we're doing stakeholder feedback, unless other people would like to extend it in any other capacity. but I feel that this is where we get the stakeholder actual feedback. So a couple of things that have changed here. I'm happy to discuss any of the issues or any of the topics. So since our last discussion, there's an additional 1.0 special education teacher at the high school, and that is new information. And I can say, having reviewed that additional FTE, that is definitely recovery orientated. I think any further description about it would be too prescriptive, in all honesty. But this is a new one, and I feel very confident of putting it under the recovery services and the need to put it under the recovery services. We did add.
That's for the high school, you said?
Yes, that's for the high school. Yes. We did add in also ventilation. So this is one of the areas for the reopening of the school. As you remember, there was a key discussion for reopening this past year, and so this allows us to do an off-scheduled sort of review of the ventilation system and maintenance of the ventilation system. Administratively, we felt that this was an important addition, both actually just for the climate of the actual building itself, to be seen to be using it for that particular purpose, to do an extra maintenance. Other than that, the topics that were on topic for the last discussion that we had, they remain on here. I'm happy to have a further discussion of them. All of these are really 1 year. There really is no more money left. By the way that this is designed, there is no more money to roll over for year 2 and 3 and 4, just the way currently we have this down. So again, I'm happy to have discussions about it and have the board's input in terms of where you might.
Did you want to go through this slide with the dollars and cents and then open it up for conversation?
That actually is what I have been doing. Apologies, I've just been looking at those are the categories right up there. Michelle, could you pull up please the dollars and cents chart, the memorandum, please, if you wouldn't mind.
Can I just ask a 30,000-foot question?
Sure.
Before I do that? Because this is new to me. Does the board need to vote on how we are spending this, or is this up to the administration? And
There's not a vote requirement. What's required here is stakeholder feedback.
great. So if we decide we don't like something, too bad, right? Basically.
No.
I don't mean in that. I don't mean to be flippant about it, but okay.
No, we've got these funds to use, and how we collectively feel as if. You may recall that we decided to try and use this with a view of we're going to open normal as possible, and use the funds to support our students and staff. So.
All right, I'll open it up now to board questions and comments. Mrs. Achman.
So if we're using all of the grant money in this year and you're saying these are for recovery, do you anticipate eliminating these FTEs at the end of the next fiscal year?
For the most part, yes, but that would not preclude something remaining. I've sort of indicated or flagged a little bit that the high school was going to be considering for the following year in the budget, but it would have to come through. It just would have to stand alone as a budgetary item.
So something like a special education teacher, how is it that do we anticipate that we are exiting a certain number of kids out of special ed after a year? I mean, how do we plan for saying at the end of a year we anticipate this role not existing?
Well, if that continues as a requirement, that would have to come through still. I mean, that would still have to be part of our budget. If that requirement for that particular position, if there wasn't offset somewhere in some way, if that remained in there.
So same with the elementary literacy interventionist. Do you anticipate that only being a 1-year position at this point? And
yes.
You don't anticipate needing them in the following year?
There's been no discussion of having those in the following year.
Mrs. Parent.
Is that something that could be done instead of an FTE position? Is that something that can be done on a consultant basis?
Are you talking about the
literacy interventions?
I don't see that because these are most highly qualified teachers, support and instruction with our youngest students. So I wouldn't be looking for consultants, I wouldn't be looking for professionals, I would be looking to use it with our most qualified teachers.
Can I follow up to that then? Won't it be hard to get someone to take a job that is a one-year job then?
But yes, potentially. Yeah.
I mean, just to be realistic, I mean, if we're saying it's a one-year job, maybe Mrs. Parent has a good idea about a consultant. It's something I would look at.
Thank you, Mrs. Stein. Mrs. Ritchie.
So I'm going to put my F&B hat on because it's always there anyway. It's just been my experience that when FTEs get added, I know that we're saying they're not going to be ongoing, but it's very difficult to reduce headcount. I hope that we can, but from a financial perspective, I'm just concerned that these are going to be potentially ongoing costs, and they may need to be because we don't know where students are going to be in a year from now. I'm just a little concerned as well because we talked about COVID expenses during the budget process, but we did not hear about any of these potential costs. So I'd like to know what has changed over the last couple months that we now need. Well, it's really 5.5 FTEs if you include the campus monitors. And the other thing that concerns me is I don't see anything in here for math. So we're really focused on reading and literacy, but we don't have any concerns about math.
So I'll just talk.
Ritchie.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I'll just talk in general terms. We didn't have $1 million to utilize. So when that came along, we made a decision, just big picture decision, of not put it towards completely plexiglass and COVID related. So we have an opportunity to use funds to support children. I wouldn't have been asking for these in the budget per se. We have an opportunity of $1 million to do something. I think that we should use it to support children as best as we can. And that's the only reason why it comes on the table. I would say that we're not going to lose where the FTEs are, like in tracking these. That's not going to happen. And I would never say that would never come back through a budget process. Like if we need something, you're going to want me to come back through a budget process and put it on the table. So that's what we would do. But other than that, we're not going to lose track of it. But it's an opportunity, and this is our best recommendation at the moment as to how we might use the funds.
So could you just, to that point and to some of the questions that have been around the table, if you look at the 1 FTE, the high school special ed teacher. So, as you've gone through the end of the year process, as more kids have come back to school, you've had more interactions with parents. So clearly there's a need, there's a tick up in PPTs, IEPs. So I guess my concern is we're solving for a year, but who's to say that those are going to drop off after a year? And so that's why, I also get concerned as to it being, we spent the money in the first year and we're done. So then it almost seems that you'll be coming back for FTEs because a lot of times these services don't just disappear after a year, as we get into understanding the students and their needs. So a little color around that.
So you're not going to for instance, the elementary literacy interventionist. That's a useful resource to be used in that way for a year. It's not necessarily going to matriculate in 2.0 being asked for or 2.5 being asked for next year. That's currently not on it. But listen, I'm not going to rule something out either. Like, I mean, if I need something and if this sparks something, then or the need is identified, I would bring it back. But there's at this point, other than if there's special education that needs to continue, that would need to continue, right? But there's no intent at this point to other than the things that I've flagged for personnel, and I would flag the school psychologist because that has been flagged, was flagged this year, not through the board process, but at the administrative level when they're looking at the budget to potentially ask that for the following year. So I'm not sure what else I can say in the sense of I'm not trying to set something up that's going to result in additional FTE. Shirley, I see you sort of.
Dr. Adler, if I may just respond to Mr. Deneen and Ms. Hockman's question about special ed. So the stimulus for this request really is, and to your point also, Ms. Ritchie, is after March. So to give you an idea of the drivers of this and the stimulus are, from our articulation meetings that start around March, there have been increased requests for certain sections in the high school, and it also impacts our Excel program. So it's both for the supplemental and specialized. The other real stimulus and driver of this is the amount of referrals in the high school. Just to give you an idea, we've had 80 referrals this year, and 36% of them happened after March. So I can't really answer the question of what will it look like next year until I see what the outcome is for this year. It really is extraordinary. And just to give you an idea, because your next question should be, what did last year look like and the year before? Last year was about 51 students, and the year before 54 students, but we usually average in the 50s. So when you look at the increased referral rate and you look at the 36% that happened from March until the end of the year, you're right, it's hard to predict what services will be recommended, if students will qualify, what recommendations, but we know we need additional sections in our comprehensive classes, co-taught classes and learning centers, or some approximation of those, as well as some support in our Excel. So that's the reason for it. I certainly will keep monitoring this and come back to you once we see what next year looks like, to see if it is, if it is a result of additional services required because of the pandemic, or if there is a different etiology to it. But that's really the request for it, and I'll certainly report out as we monitor it.
Mrs. Ackman.
I have a question for Mr. Tranberg, but I think, Mrs. Klein, that's exactly what some of us were anticipating, which is why we were worried about making sure we had money for extra sections, so I appreciate that answer. Mr. Tranberg, can you tell me your current capacity in SRBI?
Our current capacity for teacher caseloads?
Well, yeah, for teacher caseload, I'm thinking about literacy interventionists. That seems to be an SRBI type of intervention. Maybe it would go to a general classroom. So do we need more support in SRBI? Are we generalizing just another body in the classroom? Are we looking for really someone to hire for SRBI services? Or what's the specific need with this literacy interventionist?
So I'll start with the specific need. Is one of the opportunities we had this year was for more push-in using not only general instruction support, but tier 1 supports with our interventionists working with classroom teachers. Our literacy specifically are carrying higher caseloads right now than our math interventionists. There's 2 reasons. One is more students tend to need literacy support than math support. The other is they are also providing our EL services in SRBI. So those people do have more than one responsibility in who they carry on their caseload. With our goal for next year being acceleration and focusing on grade level standards, things that we're anticipating is we have more instructional minutes because we are going to be able to extend our literacy blocks in reading and writing. And as I'm talking to teachers in our transition meetings working toward the end of the year, I'm ending each meeting with what is something that your receiving teachers need to know about students that you weren't necessarily able to prepare them or practice as you have in the past. And one of those things is how students confer and interact with each other, and for our primary students, take turns. And when we have highly qualified people in the classrooms to do that and do some of that small group work, that's the best case scenario to make sure we can focus on those accelerating standards and not need more students in intervention, so to speak, but to use interventionists to provide more of that push-in and tier 1 support for general instruction.
Okay, so I would say my concern around this, and I know I've been raising it in each meeting, is that what I want to make sure is that when we're budgeting as a financial body, we're evening out our budgets so that people can expect things, and we're not saying, no, we don't need sections, no, we don't need more classes, no, if there was an administrative request for a psychologist, we never saw it, so we couldn't approve it. We put it into a grant, which is a great windfall. No one knew we'd have $1 million. And then next year, all of a sudden, we have a spike in our budget because we're bringing in FTEs. So I think everyone, but certainly speaking myself, wants to provide for children. No one here is arguing the need to provide for children. I think what we're looking is what's the best way to finance that so that it's predictable and helpful to our taxpayers.
Yeah, if I were to flag just the 5-year thing that we've started to do, well, we've been doing that, right? But I've been using that, trying to use that as a look ahead. If you look at last year's, we take a wee step beyond beyond the prior year to sort of like, can you flag things as going forward? At this point, this discussion wasn't on the table, so that document I would be trying to flag if there were personnel or other significant things that we needed in the budget to try and sort of plan as we go forward a little bit. But yes, I hear you. Yeah.
Thank you, Mrs. Ackman. Mr. Brown?
Hi, thank you. Sorry, for Rich, actually, just trying to understand the scope of the grant and how it's drafted. So I see it's about $1,025,000, and then 200 of that has to go for this special one-time COVID event for remediation, because we did have a unique one-time event, we all hope, last year. So that 200 just goes to this one-off thing that only is happening once. But the other 800, I guess what I'm trying to figure out is I'm looking at the buckets here for building safe and healthy schools. And these don't look like things that are necessarily going to be spent in a year or done in a year or one time. Can you talk about how broad that building safe schools definition is? What would be included in that as proposed or as the grant's been laid out?
So the only specifics is that 20% threshold to address learning loss. Everything else is rather broad in terms of what you can utilize it for. So for like healthy and safe buildings, it could be capital projects, it could be facility improvements, it could be maintenance, it could be PPEs. It could really be a variety of things. The technology bucket is the same. It could be devices. It could be infrastructure. It really is rather broad. It's just that 20% that's very specific.
So I guess the follow-up to that would be of the $820,000 that we have. If I want to spend say $300,000 on some sort of infrastructure or other changes or improvements that affected building safety or healthy schools, that would be something I could do using this grant money, correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mr. Cini?
Yeah, I just wanted to 50,000 feet. I mean, as late as February, we were talking about maybe $1.2 million, $1.3 million in additional expenses related to COVID, and how fluid this situation and how quickly it changed. So, to ask administration to look out to the fiscal year 23 right now, I get it. I mean, I know we want to be attentive to our students, but I think we have to be fluid as a body and understand that we're going to have to ask for resources potentially, or we might have to relieve resources that we, So I don't want to be overly optimistic, but the way this has played out just in about 2.5 short months has been remarkable in itself.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Cini. The only, in looking at the dollars, and to Mr. Brown's point on where the buckets are, I would just say that as, to your point, Mrs. Klein, as we wind down the year and see what the needs are, and I know this plan has to be put in, but that we focus the dollars as much as we can toward remediation, toward literacy, toward math, toward whatever we need to do, that's student focused. The other stuff I think we can solve for, ventilation problems and stuff like that. But I think that's the opportunity for these funds. So, Mrs. Ritchie?
So I just wanted to add on to the comments. Again, I'm hopeful that these FTEs aren't permanent, but they would represent a 0.4% increase to fiscal year 23. So I just want to flag that. And again, I want to reiterate my concern about math and making sure that when we're doing this acceleration come school opening, that we have enough resources in place to make sure that we'll be able to accelerate. Because I know we're still going to be waiting on standardized test results. We really don't have until we get, I'm guessing, Chris, until we get those results back, we're not going to have a clear picture of where students really are at this point in time.
The SBAC standardized test results are certainly another indicator, but they align very well to our district benchmark assessment, so we can anticipate pretty well with the data that we have.
So is the goal of the administration, this is due on the 22nd, I believe you just said, so that would give us June 8th to review kind of the fine-tuned plan. I think the board would like to provide a consensus to the administration that we're all on board with this plan. So is that kind of what's your timeline as you fine-tune this over the next couple of weeks and get ready for submission? I believe you said on the 22nd.
So the reopening plan itself is a version of the reopening plan that we did last year, but it's not going to have all that information in there. So that's the actual reopening plan, which is June 22nd. The plan for this, I believe, is due in August, Richard, right? So this we've still got time, and I'll continue to bring this forward and keep it open for the board as to if we want to continue to have input, if there's things that change. But right now,
So just to confirm, the reopening plan tied to the American Recovery Act is
Correct.
due June 22nd.
Yes, but it doesn't include, it does not include like what you're looking at right now.
It doesn't include how you're going to spend the
Right,
dollars.
right.
And then, Rich, if not right now, shortly thereafter, could you just confirm the date that the dollar plan is due?
Sure.
Okay.
I
Mrs.
think-
Ockman.
I think Mrs. McCammon had her hand.
Oh, sorry, thank you. Mrs. McCammon.
Can you all talk about flexibility in this plan in two different ways? I'd like to understand it's $1 million and change that we have. It is a multi-year grant, but you've gone ahead and loaded it in the beginning. And I get that, when we think about early intervention, we talk about put your dollars in early so that you can remediate and send your students forward healthily. But I'd like to understand fiscally where the flexibility is. I did read, Rich, a little bit that you'd said that if we decide to spend it differently, we could reallocate over categories and over time. And I'd like to understand the educational flexibility that is or isn't in the plan. How much sort of give and take have you built in here? I can read it a little bit, and I see you're trying to build some of its infrastructural so that you can increase capacity, but I'd like to just hear from you. And I'd also surely like to understand how much capacity is in the special ed number, or if that's really more actuals based. Thank you.
Let's work our way down.
Sure. So what's been indicated is every 6 months, you can kind of like refresh the grant. So for example, if we do submit these FTEs and they're hired either lower or less than what that estimate is, you would refresh that grant for the use of funds for that balance. If at some point maybe we decide we don't need certain recovery services or the ventilation system is less than expected, you would refresh that amount and then you would have to apply that balance to something else within those 5 buckets.
Can you repeat that portion of my question, Jill? Thank you.
Specifically for special ed, I'd like to understand if most of the dollars that are allocated are based on actual need that's identified, or whether you've built in any flexibility for needs that we cannot necessarily see in this moment, but think we may have.
The latter of the two.
Thank you.
Actually, both.
Okay.
Are you good, Jill? Okay.
Can I just
Good.
have a
Yeah.
quick follow-up? Oh, go ahead.
Well, just Chris or Alan, so when we think about the general ed environment, how much flexibility do you have built into this plan? Can you talk about sort of what your thinking was in terms of being able to be optimally responsive?
Well, the literacy interventionists themselves, the high schools to colleges, those are all services for all students. So that's really, we wanted to try and at least have representation to cover, I say all students, maybe literacy interventionists are not doing up and down the system, but generally they're available to all students within the certain grade levels of which is being allocated. So that was a lens that we looked at, but it also evolved that way a little bit because that's where the need sort of relatively evolved. When I say relatively, it's because again we have the funds, and we'd like to look and see what's the best way to use them. It doesn't mean to say that we didn't ask for these in the budget, and we should have asked for these in the budget. That's not the case, but it's an opportunity to service all of our students. So those are the main areas with flexibility within the instructional domain, so to speak.
Thank you.
Mrs. Ockman.
So I'm sorry, I think it's a quick question. Something Mrs. Klein said jogged my memory in the sense that Mr. Tram, like if we, since March, we've seen an increase in need, right? We need to fill that need, so that makes sense to me. But Mr. Turnberg, 2 meetings ago, we heard that kids and assessments were meeting benchmark or above, and that we had one more assessment to do. Has something changed in that intervening time that supports the idea of literacy interventionists in the classroom, but benchmark and above and no loss of learning, and then we need literacy interventionists? I'm trying to wrestle with those two ideas.
I wouldn't say anything has changed, but we're able to articulate what are the things that we would like to perpetuate as a result of going into next year. And I'm gonna back up. What has changed? We we are much more optimistic that we can start next year as close to normal as possible. And I don't think any of us were thinking that until maybe 3 weeks ago when everything rapidly changed. So knowing that those opportunities are going to exist to have a more typical return to school, that certainly has everyone thinking about what they need in a little bit of a different way, and that makes them able to articulate what they anticipate their needs are going to be. So has the student level of performance changed? No, but has what we want to provide students, are we able to think about that a little bit differently and more creatively? Yes, I would say that's changed. And the other opportunity, and this incorporates some of Mrs. McCammon's question as well, is we do have a new leadership team in each of our schools next year, and the opportunity to have 2 literacy interventionists to support SRBI, as we're reframing that structure, I think can only be helpful in that first year of how we're operating, if that makes any sense.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Ackman. Thank you, Mr. Trenberg. Any other further questions around this?
So,
Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
just as I said before the meeting, I have a family commitment.
Yes,
I have to go
understood.
to- Thank you.
Thank you,
Sorry
Mrs.
about
Ackman. Enjoy your graduation.
that. Thank you. Sorry, everybody.
Okay.
So, Mr. Chairman, we'll just
Yes.
keep this coming back to the board for input.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. So we're going from our American Recovery Act and discussion of dollars, and now we're moving to Switzerland and Germany to discuss possible action on the 2022 field trip proposal to Switzerland and Germany. So, Ms. Christina Maurizio, you have us traveling around the world.
Hi.
How are you?
Hi,
Good to
everyone.
see you again, and good to see these exciting trips, and thank you for all the hard work you're putting behind it. I hear there's quite a buzz around the potential of these trips.
There is.
So thank you for the work behind this.
Thank you, Christina. Very much appreciated. And the floor is yours. Let's take a wee trip to Germany and Switzerland. Go ahead.
Yes. So I prepared a presentation that's very similar to the one that I presented for our language immersion trip to Spain. So you'll notice that it looks a bit different because the information is a little bit different, but the format is the same. So there are some slides that I will be able to skip through because the information is the same, but I'm happy to go back to it once we go through questions. I know you all have a really long meeting tonight, so I'll be as brief yet thorough as possible.
We appreciate that. Thank you very much. We're excited, and you did such a great job the last time. So, to your point, if you hit the highlights and let us ask our questions, we'll keep it moving. Thank you.
Okay. Oops, I got ahead of myself. No. Okay, there we go. Thank you. Good evening, members of the Board of Education, Dr. Adley, Mr. Tranberg, and members of our community. My name is Christina Vasquez Mauricio, and I am Chair of World Languages for grades 6 through 12 for the Darien Public Schools. Thank you very much for welcoming me back to your meeting this evening, and I'm here to present Phase 2 of the Global Education and International Travel Program at Darien High School. Our goal with this trip is to complement our April break language immersion trip to Spain with the Global Leader Summit program in July of 2022, which will take our students to Switzerland and Germany. Tonight, I will give a brief overview of how we have developed this phase of our program with our students in mind. I will share some more information about our partnership with Education First, also known as EF, and recall for you their policies of how we will keep our students safe while abroad. I will also review our trip itinerary highlights, information about accommodations and meals, and we'll share what is included in the price of the trip and take questions. You'll notice, as I mentioned, that the format of the presentation is very similar to the first one, with some minor changes to reflect the Global Leader Summit programming. The desire to include this phase of the program arose when we conducted our original interest survey last December. In addition to language immersion, we also gave students and families the opportunity to provide feedback on leadership opportunities. EF's Global Leader Summit is what I consider to be the crown jewel of EF's program offerings because it gives students 3 experiences in one: the opportunity to travel throughout a part of the world conducting academic research, convene in a summit with students that have been traveling all over the world, and present that research to others in real time. We also wanted to offer these two experiences to families early so that they could decide which trip was most interesting to their family and also spread those payments over time. As you know from my previous presentation, and perhaps through your own travels with your family, when young people travel, they come back changed and with a greater worldview. And not only does the Global Leader Summit offer students the opportunity to make what they've been learning in class applicable in the real world, but it also provides them with a forum to do research on location. I will talk more about what this means when I go over the itinerary in a few slides. For our trip to Switzerland and Germany, we have also partnered with Education First, which I introduced to you when I presented Spain. They are the world leader in educational travel. And these, again, are some of the locations here in Connecticut that they've worked with, some schools in Connecticut that they've worked with to bring this programming to their school community. As you know, the safety of our students is our #1 priority while abroad, and EF safety and security protocols are one of the main reasons we have partnered with them to help us plan our trip. All of the safety protocols reviewed in my previous presentation also apply to the Global Leader Summit through Switzerland and Germany. This is one of the slides that I didn't change because the information is the exact same. But I'm happy to go back and answer questions about it when we get to questions. Okay, this is my favorite part. The focus of the excursion to Switzerland and Germany is health and wellness. The Global Leader Summit is more than just a leadership summit. It is a week-long sojourn through Switzerland, where students will be spending a lot of time outdoors, exploring and researching how sports, adventure activities, and time in nature affect the human body, our brains, and set us up for a lifetime of health. On day 1, students fly overnight to Switzerland, and on day 2, they arrive in Geneva. On day 3, they spend most of the day in Geneva and will have a private tour of the European Union headquarters, which I think is so amazing. And on day 4, on days 4 and 5, they will travel through Interlaken and the Swiss Alps. On day 6 and 7, they will be in Lucerne. And then on days 8 and 9 and 10 and 11, students continue on to the summit itself in Germany, where they will spend an additional 2 days exploring Berlin and 2 days attending the summit. At the summit, students will meet up with other students their age that have been traveling through other parts of the world on their own research trips and present their findings. There will be many keynote speakers who are leaders in the health and wellness space that students will have the opportunity to meet, in addition to presenting their own research. If the Global Leader Summit sounds very business-like, I promise it is not. Because there will be a health and wellness research focus to the trip, most of the time students will be outdoors exploring the beautiful landscape of the Swiss Alps, and also getting time to see some of the highlights of this region, particularly in the cities in Switzerland and in, obviously, Berlin, where the summit is. There are a lot of hands-on sports and wellness research activities. It's all project-based learning. As I mentioned, there's a private tour of the European Union headquarters, a zip line over Grindelwald First. They hike up Mount Rigi and visit the mineral baths, and they also visit the International Red Cross and study global health initiatives. And eventually, once they get to Berlin, they'll visit the Brandenburg Gate and the Berlin Wall, and then attend the Leadership Summit at the very end, where they will engage in international team building activities with other students their age that have been doing their own research throughout other parts of the world. The accommodations on this trip are very similar. They're all centrally located in safe areas. They meet high standards for safety, quality, and cleanliness. This again is one of the slides that I did not change because the standards for EF's accommodations for students are the same on the Global Leaders Summit as well as on the language immersion trip through Spain. And last but certainly not least, this is a breakdown of everything that is included in the cost of the trip and what is not. You'll notice that this trip is to 2 places. Students land in Geneva, and then there is ground travel throughout Switzerland, and then they also travel to Berlin on an airplane. That flight is also included. So all round trip airfare and transportation on tour, all hotel accommodations. Our EF tour director that I mentioned during my first presentation, the person that meets us on location and travels with us until we board the plane on the way home, we have one of those individuals that will be with us on this trip as well, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's also included in the trip. All educational programming, guided tours, activities, excursions, as well as the keynote speakers, both at the European Union and at the Red Cross and the Global Leaders Summit in Berlin. Breakfast and dinner, the EF Traveler Support Team, the project-based learning program to help with the students' research project, the customizable tour donation page, which is also available with the language immersion trip, and the Uncommon App College Essay Toolkit that also is available with the language immersion trip. And what's not included is the exact same. So travel to the airport, passport, visa, baggage fees, spending money, lunches and snacks, tips, college credit through EF upon completion of this research project, and the Global Travel Protection Plan, which can be added for a fee before students go on tour. And that's it. That was fast.
Christina, well done. Thank you very much. That's very exciting. I mean, the whole component of it with the EU and the leadership conference is excellent. So thank you so much for all the hard work behind it. I'll open up for some quick questions with the board. Mrs. Parent?
Thank you. Christina, thank you for this. This is really exciting, and if you need a chaperone, I'm happy to join you all. I'm curious, is there a student cap on how many students can do this? What grades is this open to? Do you have people signed up already?
We do. We also have students signed up for this trip. As I mentioned during my last presentation, we still fall under the no risk enrollment period. So if for whatever reason this trip would not be included, all of the students would not be approved, all of the students that have already registered, their families would get all of their money back. There is a cap on this trip. It's 80 students, but that's just the general cap that EF gives us. The trip is open to students in grades 10, 11, and 12. Similar to our language immersion trip. However, what is different about this trip is that it is not only exclusively for students that are studying a world language. This trip is open to all students in the DHS community that are in grades 10, 11, and 12.
Thank you.
That will be in grades 10, 11, and 12 next year, not currently.
Right. Thanks.
Mrs. Ritchie?
Thank you. Do you get to go on both these trips, just out of curiosity? And if you need another chaperone, I'm also available. It makes you want to be a high school student again. It's exciting. It's wonderful. I thank you again for all your work on this. I think it's amazing that we're giving our students these opportunities that we haven't in the past, and I'm a huge proponent of it. So thank you very much for bringing both of these trips forward to the board.
My pleasure. Thank you.
I wanted to thank you because I did notice that Dr. Adley did sign this. So thank you very much. And I'm just really excited, and I don't really have any questions. I see there's 10 students enrolled.
Yes.
Do you think, based on the fact that it's not during the school year, that you'll have an issue getting chaperones?
I'm not sure. It could go either way. Again, the list of people that are interested in going keeps growing, so I don't believe we will have an issue with chaperones. This trip also occurs early in the it occurs early in the summer, early to mid-July. So hopefully that will still give the adults in our DHS faculty an opportunity to make plans for later on in the summer as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Maroney.
Yeah, just a question about the summit in Germany. Is it in German? Is it translated into English? What is the primary language?
Oh, that's a great question. I should have included that. The primary language of this is English. So EF Tours, while it is Education First as an organization, while it is based in the United States, their primary language of communication is English. And the assumption is that most students attending these excursions are speakers of English primarily. This is not a language immersion trip, so our students will not be required to speak French, Italian, or German while they're on the trip. So I would say all of the keynote speakers and all of the research will be conducted in English.
Thank you, Mr. Maroney. Mrs. McCammon.
Just a quick comment to say thank you for providing an opportunity that is not language-based. I think it's important for students who may not either be interested in a language-based experience to have another option to understand the global community. So thank you.
Absolutely. That was actually why we wanted to propose both of these at the same time.
Mrs. Parent.
Thank you. Just another quick question. This is a thought that's been bubbling in my head for a while since I've seen these two trips. I feel like there's a third leg to this travel stool, and it has to do with service. And I'm curious if there's any thought in your mind of potentially adding another trip down the road that has a service component to it.
Yes. So I will not be adding a third trip for next school year. They're just two of them. But our hope is that for both our language immersion trips and for the Global Leader Summit, that they both happen every school year and that we alternate with the focus of the trip. So the focus for this Global Leader Summit, for example, is health and wellness. And our language immersion trip is obviously language immersion. Our hope for one of those two offerings for the 2023 spring and summer will be service learning.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Parent. Any other board questions or comments? So may I have a motion to allow Ms. Christina Maurizio to move forward with planning and organizing this trip? Mr. Cini, second by Mr. Roney. All those in favor? That is unanimous, minus Mrs. Achman, who had to leave. Great. Thank you again. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christina.
We look forward to future updates and more trips. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Tremendous job. Thank you very
so
much.
much.
Thank you.
Well
Thank
done.
you.
All right, we're going to keep moving along on to the presentation and discussion on proposed district technology plan 2021-2024. Mr. Christopher Tranberg and Dr. Joan McGettigan and Dr. Adley.
Yes, good evening. I'm pleased this evening to be able to share the technology plan. This was a request that came from the board, and it was scheduled for this time of year. Some time ago, the state required plans. That went away, and it's not necessarily common practice for districts to have such a comprehensive plan. So I want to recognize the work of our curriculum director, our director of technology, our director of informational technology. They've done a wonderful job putting this together, and I think you'll see as we go through there's some highlights to this that are in advance of what actually might be expected from the State Department of Education moving forward, and we're well ahead of the game. So with that, it's our intention to walk through as quickly as possible the plan, what's involved in a plan and how to interpret it, and we'll look forward to having a wee discussion. With that, I'll turn it over to Chris.
Great, thank you. Thank you, everyone. It's our pleasure to present this plan to you tonight. The first thing you'll notice is it's titled the Future Ready Technology Plan. The reason for that is it is based on the Future Ready Technology Framework that is presented by Future Ready Schools. Future Ready Schools is an international organization that is partnered with just about every professional organization you can name in education, including the American Institute of Research. This plan is also the first to intentionally connect to the recently adopted board vision, mission, core values, and strategic plan. The overview of our presentation this evening is we'll do a quick overview of a timeline, discuss the design of the framework, show how there's a crosswalk with our guiding documents, and then we're going to focus most of the time on what we call the framework drivers. Those are the parts of the plan that are most directly connected to student learning and thereby the most important part of the plan. This timeline provides an overview of broadly what's happened since 2018 to what we hope to continue on to 2024. In 2018, the District Technology Council was in transition of some leadership transition, and when Dr. McGettigan came on board, she inherited some of the thinking of that council, and she has worked in her time to organize that into a plan that we were working with last year, and it was connected to some of our goals, as you might remember. But this year, we spent more time, and in her professional networks, what we know to be coming is the state is likely to adopt the Future Ready framework as the technology framework for the state. So we are just on board before that officially happens, which we are anticipating will happen before the end of the year. So from what Dr. McGettigan inherited, she translated that into, made connections to the core drivers of the Future Ready framework, and then she went back out to that original tech council of the members that are still here to make sure we were honoring the work that that tech council did. And so you'll see their thinking reflected in this plan as well. They provided feedback along the way. This is the actual framework. We have student learning at the center because that is the main purpose of everything that we are doing here. And all of the drivers that surround student learning are not independent, but they all count on each other. So even though we've broken them out and tried to create strategic actions that align to each of those, we know that they all need to work together. One of the pieces that is different with our Future Ready framework compared to the Future Ready Schools framework is a theory of action. So the theory of action is a philosophical position or belief that if we do these certain things, then we all have a result of student learning. And ours reads, if we create innovative, transformative, and sustainable learning environments to provide technology-rich learning experiences, then all students will develop future-ready technology skills to enhance and support their learning in school and beyond. One of the commitments that we've made as a district is one-to-one, and the reason that one-to-one is important in realizing the Future Ready framework is equitable access for students. A one-to-one plan provides all students with access to a device. It also makes clear for teachers what students have access to, so when we're designing curriculum and designing lessons, we can anticipate what students have and what they'll be able to do with those technologies. On the more technical side of that, when we have specific devices, we're able to service those devices. If we have a plan like a bring your own device, we cannot provide support for those devices, which becomes more important with the fourth reason, that as we are using these devices for testing, we have to be able to put secure browsers on those devices, and we don't have the right to do that to student devices. The next ring after the theory of action is just a cycle of cycle of planning that we would go through with vision setting, planning, implementation, assessing, and then always refining to inform the vision. And collaborative leadership is the outer ring, which speaks to all of the teams, and you'll see cross-functional teams appear throughout the plan, and that refers to every single team and the relationship between those teams across the district. Our recommended way of navigating the plan is doing this online, in which we will release it to the public, but we wanted to make sure you had a chance to see it first. There are three main components to it. I'll start in the middle, the goals and actions aligning to the strategic plan. So they are referenced throughout the rest of the presentation on where you can find them in the written plan. To support that, we have video messages from student and staff, as well as samples of student work. And that's in response to the questions and feedback we've heard from the board over the past year of, well, what is the technology actually used for and what is it doing? So we tried to bring that to life through the plan itself. We've also intentionally crosswalked this document with some of the documents that came out of the Strategic Planning Committee, just to show those connections are made. So first, we started with core values, and I'll just zoom in on that. So wellness was a prioritized core value of the board, and we talked about how would we realize that or make that come to life for students in the district. So the realization is ensuring safe digital environments for all, focusing on cybersecurity, equitable resources, and balance in digital use. And so you might say, okay, so what does that mean? What does that look like in classrooms? And so some examples are, again, the one-to-one providing access to all students, making sure that we have processes in place for data privacy, making sure students are staying safe by being able to monitor what they are doing with the devices. And I'll say most importantly is making sure we're developing curriculum that is providing those guaranteed experiences for that student learning and use of technology in the classroom. And additionally, assistive technology and accessibility for all students is woven throughout the plan, as well as the emphasis on using technology for creation and not consumption. And generally speaking, one of the important conversations that we've had at the table is about screen time. And the way that we want to address screen time is, again, making sure we're using these devices for creation and not just using them for the sake of using them. And the way we do that is embedding specific expectations within our curriculum to show where are those guarantees of when we want students using technology to show their learning. There's also a crosswalk of what I hope looked very familiar to you on pages 10 and 11. On the left-hand side of both of those pages are the strategic goals directly from the Board of Ed strategic plan. And on the right-hand side are those drivers from the framework. And again, all of those drivers connect to each of these, but we wanted to show where we're intentionally creating a plan to highlight how that driver will inform that section of the plan. Now, as we transition into this section, this is taking each of those drivers and just pulled out one idea from each of those to show how we are making those connections to all of these. And with curriculum, instruction, and assessment, which is obviously near and dear to my heart, we're pulling out the intentional use of standards. So the ISTE standards, or the International Society for Technology Education. One of the things we need to do as we are revising and developing new curriculum, it's a required thing, not just a nice to have, is making sure we're embedding these standards across all content areas. And an example is knowledge construction and creating and communicating for students. So as we are showing or embedding assessments in our curriculum, we need to not only make sure that the units of study are reflecting those specific content areas, but also skills in these different areas of technology. To point out how complex this is at the same time we are also auditing our curriculum for cultural responsiveness, and where we'll also be embedding evidence of portrait of the graduate. So our documents are becoming more complex, and they have to represent all of these things in all content areas. Very connected to that are professional learning for our staff. And just like there are standards of content knowledge for our students and skills, there's also standards in technology for staff. And one of those is staff as facilitators of use of technology. And that's another way that we want to be really specific as to what are those guaranteed times we want students using technology as to not over-consume with it. And a good example of that this year is Seesaw. So for our staff this year, we had to spend a lot of time on just how to use Seesaw. And the intent going forward as we deepen learning is how do we use Seesaw for students to demonstrate their learning? And then ultimately, how do we use Seesaw for students to share their learning? Not only with their peers and their teacher, but at home, because it's a powerful communication tool when it's used to its full potential. And the last piece I'll share before I turn it over to Dr. McGettigan is collaborative leadership. And I'm highlighting one piece of that, and that is our Professional Development and Evaluation Committee, which is referred to often as a PDEC. A PDEC is a committee made up of administrators and teachers who provide oversight to professional development in the district as well as teacher evaluation. And this group is really important when we talk about that idea of cross-functionality, because PDEC represents every school, as many grade levels as possible, and as many content areas as possible. So as we're providing that professional learning, we want to make sure we have representation from all schools, so we're providing programs that teachers feel they need and would benefit them most. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. McGettigan.
Thank you, Mr. Tranberg. Good evening, and thank you to the board for providing this time to review our new Future Ready Tech Plan. As Mr. Tranberg just highlighted, collaborative leadership is the essential support for this framework for each driver, especially budget and resources. The budget for technology is a collaborative effort. It encompasses all stakeholders. Each item in the budget is the result of careful analysis, ensuring that each expenditure is student-centered and is aligned to the district's plans and goals. So, for example, when determining the type of Chromebook case or Chromebook cart to purchase for a classroom, both teachers and administrators are consulted to determine the best option for each student, classroom, and district. Equipment replacement cycles, which you can see on pages 30 and 31 of the plan, are constantly monitored to ensure that the latest and most secure technology is available to students and staff, all in a fiscally responsible manner. On replacement cycles, we consider both the life cycle of the device and does it meet the current operating system. As Mr. Adams mentioned during the budget meetings, for example, when Google determines it will not support a particular operating system anymore, we need to order new devices. Our focus in this driver is to ensure all expenditures, again, are thoughtful, student-centered, aligned to the district goals. The district goal in particular from the strategic plan of improving technology to support teaching and learning. We are very efficient at managing our technology. Our staff utilizes the latest industry management tools, maximizes spending by bidding major purchases, and we are continuously seeking newer, better, and less expensive methods to manage the infrastructure. We now turn to the robust infrastructure driver. This driver is critical, as without a solid infrastructure, the majority of our technology would not function. To ensure that our infrastructure will be flexible and dynamic, we must support it with both human and financial resources, which includes periodic audits and solid replacement schedules. Again, you can see that on page 30 and 31. Cybersecurity is a key focus within this driver and plan, ensuring that our data is safe, secure with next generation security tools, and staff professional development. This knowledge is also disseminated to our students through our digital citizenship curriculum. Our next driver is community partnerships. Of course, the most important community partnership is between school and family. Ensuring our students, teachers, and parents are well informed is a critical focus of this driver. As reflected in our district strategic plan, we need to have a more robust presence on social media and take advantage of all communication channels to provide information to our stakeholders in a timely fashion, in a consistent manner, and in a variety of ways. Some of our stakeholders like email, others prefer text messages, and still others prefer social media, whether it's Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. Our goal is to provide timely information on a consistent basis across these channels. We also seek to engage our Darien community as we look for opportunities to collaborate with community experts in the life of our schools to ensure the success of our learners. Next, we get to look at data and privacy. So looking at data and privacy, we've worked really hard to streamline the processes for adding software and hardware. We work collaboratively to determine effective use to support instruction, while also making sure that we're respecting student data privacy in accordance with the Connecticut state law. For example, when a teacher introduces a new application that's been approved, he or she can be certain the resource is safe for students in maintaining their privacy, and that the resource has been vetted for instructional soundness. Okay, if we move to the next driver, time and space. This is our final driver. During this past year of the pandemic, we learned that space and time have new meaning as our learning sometimes turned to virtual. We learned it is critical to have flexible learning environments, to develop innovative practices, and to ensure that we had the right pieces in place, from devices to professional learning to curriculum. We learned how to learn beyond physical places and to take advantage of asynchronous opportunities in learning. One of our more important focus points in this driver will be our Libraries Reimagined project. As we transition from traditional school libraries to Learning Commons, which will serve as both the physical and virtual learning hub of each school, assuming that this project continues to receive the support of the board. And finally, as we look ahead to the future, it's important to support research and development, which allows the administration to evaluate new technologies as they are developed. Technology changes at such a rapid pace, it's not always easy to predict where we may want to invest next. But we ask for board support in the following 3 areas potentially. Wearable technologies, virtual reality, and augmented reality have shown great potential. So down the road, those are possibilities. But again, it's difficult to predict such a future that changes so quickly. Again, thank you to the board for providing this time to report on our Future Ready framework, and I will turn things over to Mr. Tranberg.
Thank you. We can dig in many other areas, but we wanted to highlight the drivers as the place where we've developed strategy and action specific to what we'd like to do over the next 3 years to address many of the things we've heard, well, that I've heard come up in the past year or past 16 months. And we gladly take questions and have a discussion at your leisure.
Mr. Tranberg and Dr. McGettigan, thank you very much for the presentation. Appreciate that. So we'll open it up to board questions and comments.
Mr. Chairman, may I just...
Yes,
I
sure.
just wanna
Sorry, Dr. Adler.
No, that's, I just want to recognize Michelle, Ms. Lopez, because she's the one who designed the actual plan itself and the layout and did the whole production herself. So she's here, so I just wanted to recognize her. Thank you.
Michelle. Great. Mr. Cini.
So I might be stating the obvious, but thanks for the time and the presentation and the thought you guys put into this. But I think what we're really looking for is the utilization of those tools that you mentioned in measuring actual usage and seeing some hard numbers. Because again, I'm going to use. It's always dangerous when you use your family as an example. I see progress as each child, the younger the child is, the more use they get out of the school-issued devices. But I think as a community, that's a question that just keeps coming up over and over. And if you could hit on that, I think you'd get a lot more buy-in from the entire community. I think we're there. I mean, we have tremendous faith in the STEM efforts and the technology efforts, but put some data behind that would be awesome.
Thank you, Mr. Cini. Mrs. Ritchie.
First of all, I just wanted to thank everyone involved in this. Clearly, it was a very big endeavor, and thank you for all the time and effort that you put into it. I think from my perspective, the first thing I wanted to touch on is, Chris, you mentioned personal devices just briefly and how you didn't think it would work for our students because of the testing that they would have to do and the, I guess, because of security that you'd have to put on their devices, their personal devices. Is that did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, so there are 4 reasons I presented as why providing a device is preferred over a bring your own device type of policy. And 3 and 4 of those, number 3 was our ability to provide service and tech support to devices that are not school issued is not there. And the 4th reason is as we are moving into testing being online, including SATs that we anticipate next year, we do need to make sure that there are secure browsers installed on those devices, and the state will require that those devices are school-issued devices.
So, I mean, that was one of my questions was going to be, can we still explore the ability of families to use their personal devices? But it sounds like it's going to get more complicated because of that state requirement.
From
We
all
would have
signs-
to have enough devices for every student, regardless of whether or not they would, I guess if we're simultaneously testing students, we'd have to have enough devices for them to use.
From
for
everything
testing.
I've heard, all signs point to yes, but I'll look to Dr. McGettigan as she had the great responsibility of being our district-wide testing coordinator this year. I just want to confirm that I'm accurate in that statement.
Mr. Tranberg, you are accurate. Everything that we have heard from state testing, from the College Board, it is going to become really complicated for those districts that currently have BYOD policies in place. They're going to need to have that count of devices, as you just said, Mrs. Ritchie, one for each student. So next year is going to be, I think, a messy for a lot of school districts. Not so messy for us, though.
Mrs. Parent.
So just in terms of dollars and cents, and again, I will echo everybody's, this was an incredible amount of time and effort that you all took to put this together. But in terms of the money aspect, I see the, the replacement cycle. Are there additional investments that you project bringing to the board in the next 5 years?
I would say in those three categories that Dr. McGettigan presented of wearables, augmentation, and virtual reality, what those translate in to me would be significant changes in current course offerings or new course offerings to accommodate those technologies. And that's where that expense would come, and it would come through a new course proposal.
Okay.
I don't know if this is, for me to talk about virtual reality and augmentation, what that would look like is where I would turn to my colleague, if you'd like to know any more about what that might be.
If I could give you an example, Ms. Parent, picture that you are in ninth grade biology and you are walking into your classroom and the entire walls, flooring, and ceiling with the click of a button have been turned into the interior of a human heart. And so you are able to interact and touch and really examine how the heart works. This technology exists now. I've been to a company and had to sign all sorts of non-disclosure agreements, but this technology exists now. They just haven't figured out a way to make it affordable. And I think as soon as they figure that out, learning is going to look really different. So I don't know if that's 2 years out, 5 years out. Technology is just gosh darn difficult to predict, but it's really exciting things that are on the horizon.
And I assume there'll be some PD associated with whatever comes down the pike as well.
Yeah, another example, staying with science, something that I have seen as well is virtual dissections. So instead of students, because you're not going to operate and dissect a heart, but you can do a virtual dissection using this 3D technology, which is rather impressive.
Thank you, Mrs. Parent. Mrs. Stein.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I want to push back a little bit. As you know, I keep harping on one-to-one at the high school specifically. The majority of our surrounding school districts are BYOD at the high school. When you think about testing at the high school level, it's not all grades, all levels at one time. I know anecdotally most of the older children are bringing their own device. So if we are going to say we want to be one-to-one, we either have to stand behind it as a district and make it a policy of no outside devices, or we have to allow kids to bring them in and figure out the financial implication of that. We're sort of living in no man's land, in my opinion. The testing isn't the strongest argument to me because I think you're going to need devices anyway. But I think philosophically we have to figure out what we're standing behind here with the BYOD or one-to-one with our school issued.
So I would say, Katie, I would agree that the testing isn't just the solid argument and only argument to make that. I would agree with that, and I would agree that to some degree there are students who bring in other devices. We've just been through a process where basically, our senior class has gone through 9 through 12 with at least a device. It may not be the device that we have now with pens and stuff, but they've gone through with at least a device. And I think there's learnings in there that we can take away. At the moment, we have committed to the actual iPad as the device. I do think that COVID has, I don't think it's necessarily solidified that position, to be honest with you. But there is, it's actually disrupted it a little bit in terms of actually making sure that commitment's in place and that staff are expecting students to bring it along. Now, there are students who bring, I do know that there are students who bring their own devices, right? And actually prefer a device for certain aspects of the instruction versus something else. So I'm not going to sit here and say that that's not the case, and we have a wee bit of work to do there, but I certainly recognize the dynamic, and you're not necessarily wrong in sort of where we are in implementation.
Mr. Brown.
So, following Mr. Sini's wise comment, I don't want to use my kids as an example, but I've certainly seen similar to what he has. And again, I don't think we should be having a device level discussion here.
Right.
But I know for a fact that the bar exam was secured with your own device and easy software 5 years ago. I would think there's options to do that now, but I don't know specifically what the state is using, and that's all I wanted to say on devices. I do appreciate putting this plan together. I know we've asked for it several times and over a period of time, and obviously COVID was a big distraction, so we totally understand how long it's been. So thank you for doing the work and putting this together. I would like to contrast this, though, with the work of the building, the subcommittee, and the work that's been done with the elementary schools and eliminating the portables. We were in a situation last summer where a few people on the board wanted to keep that effort alive and moving forward, and I think in less than a year we were able to move, not just from a broad goal of eliminating the portables, but actually having actual plans that you could build off of, not just a conceptual drawing. We were able to work with the administration to build out the ed specs, and are now in an opportunity to move that forward to the town, having done the thorough diligence and done the actual constructions of an actionable plan necessary to do that. And we did that very efficiently with a small number of people, and we did that in a very short amount of time. I look at this plan here, projecting out 2021 out to 2024 to have a committee to evaluate where we're going. And this is a very long plan, and there's some great illustrations, but I would contrast it to where we are with the building plans. We have actual drawings of what we're going to do and what it's going to look like and what goals are being solved. We don't have that here. So I don't know whether I should make a motion or I defer to our secretary or the chair as to the best way to move forward. But I think that the curriculum committee or a curriculum committee should be formed of the board to take on some of this work and to take on the technology work and how that works in curriculum, which is in our purview, to really figure out the best way to move this forward at an expeditious rate, something that's actionable. And I think Chris also highlighted some of the changes that have gone on in the curriculum over the past year. Perhaps that should be something that's looked at as well, and how those changes that came from COVID or came from the work that's been being done work in. But I just think this is too long a horizon, and I think that it may be helpful to have a process that could expedite resolving how we're going to work forward.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Do you want to comment, Dr. Adley?
Yeah, that's a much bigger discussion. That they're completely different. I respectfully say they're different purposes. The example you said, Mr. Brennan, and I appreciate all the work the board has done on moving forward the libraries and so on. They're just different purposes and different functions. And the idea of the curriculum and committees and stuff, that's a board needs to sort of reconcile that as to how it wants to. I think the board has discussed curriculum committees on and off over the years before even I was here. So I think that's a bigger discussion. But I would just say that the plan itself, just the same way as like when you see budget, well, the budget numbers aren't in here, but it refers to them, and they're in. It's a 5-year rollout plan in the actual budget book that we have. So that's where it shows up. So I just see it playing a wee bit of a different purpose. Behind these are strategic actions and implementation. I'll tell you that this plan is, I put this plan up against any plan in the surrounding district or anybody against the state, to be honest with you, because you're leading the way in this in terms of the actual framework that's to be used and the types of things that will be in the plan. Now, we can argue over or have different dispositions over different aspects of the strategic actions. Sure, certainly we could do that. I'm just not sure that I'm not sure that I'm capturing and understanding the scope of what you're saying, and I just worry about that in the sense of it's a bigger question, and certainly curriculum committees and the role of technology and where it plays and lies. Happy to have the discussion, but I don't know it's a quick discussion just to have like now.
I don't think it's a quick discussion. I think Mr. Brown and I think everyone on the board has made good comments around this. And I think if I go back to the conversation over the last year and some of those questions that have come up today from the board, I think we want to understand where we want to go. And I think to the point of Mr. Brown and some other questions and Mrs. Stein, we've got to make some decisions about policy, about procedure. And that's where I think, we need to embed that in this and understand if we're going one-to-one, if we're going to issue the technology ourselves and not have bring your own device. And I don't think that discussion has been had or that discussion has been resolved. I think there's been an ongoing dialogue at the board level that we want to see and understand some metrics as to the usage of this technology. I mean, I think those of us that have kids in high school and Middlesex, we see it continuously. They don't take their devices, they use their devices, we hear feedback, the teachers use the devices, the teachers don't use the devices. I mean, there's a lot of, I'm getting into the weeds, but there's a lot of in the weeds that I think we need to see and hear to continue the dialogue around this. I would like to see as part of this plan, and I think the greater community would like to see, it's great the plan in here about replacement and stuff like that, but to me, in the plan, we should have estimates of the dollars next to that replacement cycle. I think we've been guided that the community would like to see a forecast of what the dollars are, what the replacement cycles are. So I think you need to embed that in a technology plan. So I think, how the devices are being used, I think I'd like to understand more about the professional development and the teachers. And I think to the point of some questions, to me, there's always a missing link where how is this working with the curriculum? So I think I'd like to see from an elementary standpoint in a day in the life of a second grader, what amount of time when they spend on math or reading or any of the other topics is there interaction with the one-to-one device versus a group. I think we really need to understand that to continue to get our arms around the investment that I think we've made. Look, I think the investment proved phenomenal with the year that we've had, but I think what the board is looking for is to fine-tune it a little bit and tie it into some policy and procedures, tie it into everyone understanding what the financial forecast looks like to continue to invest in this technology. And yes, some of the great stuff that Dr. McGettigan talked about, that stuff will come up and we'll have that discussion around the investment. I also think of tying in, when do we audit our systems? Are we using cloud services, shared services? Like, how does that all work with this? I think that rounds out a technology plan in my mind, and there may be different components of it. And then the only other thing as I go through this, and it's embedded within it, but I think it would be important to break out and really understand from a special education standpoint how this technology works with our special ed students. So those are just a couple of points I bring to the table. Mrs. McCammon.
I'd like to pick up on the last one about special education specifically. I did note that AT is mentioned and described in here, assistive technology, excuse me. But I think that particularly for children who are for a number of our children, technology enables them to access the world in ways that we could not have imagined not that many years ago. And so I think could be some opportunities, like looking at community partnerships, for example, where we could more specifically, I know it's at a fairly high level, but for example, I'd love to see someone in special education administration listed as one of the folks responsible for developing community partnerships, because I think the use of technology and training in assistive technologies could be a critical part of job placement as we move forward. So I would ask that get looked at through not just the student life cycle, but also as we transition students out into the world. I'll stop.
So I'll just mention, just because Mr. Chairman, you put it on the table, and whether it's operationalized that way or not, the decision about the devices was made and is articulated in here. The finances are articulated in here. Yes, it defers to the budget book, but the budget book gives like.
I'm going to disagree with you on
Okay.
the decision on the devices, because we have this conversation continuously at the board table. I've got parents running around trying to find devices, so they turn them in so they're not charged for them. So we may have made a decision about the devices, but the decision isn't tied to policy or procedure as to how to execute every day and how we deliver the curriculum. And I think that's what we want to get to. It's not going to happen overnight, but we've invested in it. But I think what I'm not feeling is we're not taking it to the next level. And how are we intimately tying it to curriculum so those kids are showing up regardless of the grade with their device and using their device? I'm telling you from feedback from having kids in the high school, it's a little all over the place.
Mr. Dean, if I
Yeah.
can just respond to, I agree with much of what you're saying about when are students using it within the curriculum, and that's why it's articulated in this plan as that's the first goal, is there are technology standards that in our curriculum documents currently are not linked into our units of study. So that's why it's a goal, because we can't provide that information until we take the time to embed those standards in to say this is exactly when we're using these technologies and this is how. And with sensitivity to not only differentiation in general, but learners of all abilities, we don't want to say you cannot use technology to do this, because sometimes it's the best way for certain students to show their learning. So to do that skillfully and carefully, really, it does require the time, and I understand the frustration of I just want to know what it is and how, because so do I. That's how I always am, and that's my personality. But I do know that if you are going to do this right and do it thoughtfully, we have to embed the technology standards in all of our units of study as they go through a revision process. And it can't all happen in 1 year because we don't have the capacity to do that piece.
Yeah. Mrs. Parent?
I was just gonna say, I don't have children at the high school yet, and my children use their school issued device every single day for every single thing that they do for school. So I don't know if it's, if there is a shift in paradigm thinking from, by the time my children will be in high school, maybe they will all be using them. But I think that for every person that you say doesn't use their device, you could probably find one who said they do use their device. So I think we have to, again, creating the sample size is challenging. But I think what I've heard at this table for the past 6 months or whatever is that the administration has said we are a one-to-one school and they will use the iPads. And if that's not being done operationally, then that's where the fallout is. But I think there has been a stake in the ground that we're using iPads, and that's what it is. So, but if there's a disconnect between some teachers or whatever, then that's the administration's job to make it happen.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you, but I hear the same scenario coming out of the middle school too, with use of devices and not use of devices. So that's where I think we need some focus and we need some concrete, whether it's policy, whether it's procedure, how it all ties it together with the professional development that you're doing also. Mr. Brown.
Thank you. I guess just following up, I again, not to give stories, but I have an elementary school who's never used the Chromebook in the house. Didn't work on Wi-Fi during the pandemic, so was on another device. That's just the reality, and I doubt I'm the only person with that situation in town. Chris, going back to your point, talking about the development of the plan and trying to be actionable and moving things along quickly, I appreciate that. That's great. Thank you. I guess what is a little frustrating for me is just the length of time this discussion's going on. And I caveat that with the fact that, yes, last year you guys had a lot of other things to worry about. So I totally understand that, and I don't mean to put any blame there on the timeline. So we'll toll that amount of time that happened during COVID. So please understand, I didn't say it. But I think what concerns me also on the timeline is we look back to a decision that was made, I think 2 or 3 superintendents ago, and by a big turnover in the board. And I think that decision was made to be device specific, which I can't speak to the times because I wasn't there, but I've heard anecdotally that it was very cutting edge and avant-garde and we're really going to be leading the pack. That may not be where we are now. And so I keep hearing a lot of conversations from other parents, from other people all on this board that there's a real device issue. And if that's something that maybe is actionable, I think that's the wrong way to do it. I think we should drive this from curriculum. But if that's something where we're getting the most noise, the most complaints, the most question financially, and it doesn't really tie in directly to our curriculum, in terms of an actionable plan, that might be where we have to look first. And just because we picked a device, 8, 10 years ago, I don't know why we're married to it forever. So I just throw that out there as a consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mrs. Ritchie?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I feel, maybe the iPads are right now, but I would like us to be very fluid and be able to pivot if something changes. So I think that's just, in this book, we now appear to be wedded to these devices for the next 4 years, but I feel like if something changes in technology, we should be able to adapt, because technology changes every day, and we don't know what next year is going to look like. So I think right now the Apple devices are working for the high school students somewhat, but let's be fluid, let's adapt, let's be willing to change. I think that's what I want to see more of in this plan, that technology is changing, and we should be able to change with it and be able to adapt.
That's a good point.
I think, Mr. Tranberg, to your point, and maybe it's embedded within here, but I think what, the board would like to see is, kind of more specific how or what this technology looks like with a specific class, and how it interacts and how it works. Because then I think it drives how we feel the teachers are doing the professional development, how the students are then using, or how the students are know they have to live and breathe by that device that they're using for the school. Mr. Sini.
Just really quick, I mean, it may be too late for the rising juniors and seniors, and maybe focus on that effort. I may go back to, again, my example, and it's like a waterfall effect, and we can focus on those classes coming up and not force feed those that are kind of beyond implementing a unified device. I think it'd be awesome, and you could show us that. Like, I get it. My rising seniors probably not going to want to ever use the school issued device, and we're not going to force feed them to do it either. But the rising freshmen is a perfect opportunity to start and show us through their life cycle. So.
Well, I think too, you're at the tail end now, but I don't know what you've done, and you could be interesting to see, like, groups of seniors or juniors, like, how has technology worked for you? How has it not worked for you? How has it worked for you you're doing this all the time, looking at lessons learned through COVID in terms of how you're delivering education. But I think we could use the students more, because I think the more you get out of the students, the more they feel we're listening and working, the day around them. I think the more input you're going to get and the more buy-in you're going to get from the students.
And I'm sorry, Joe, could I just follow up one thing? And, watching my oldest go to college, it is BYO, so maybe it doesn't fit for junior and senior year. Again, I leave that up to you to decide, but we don't want to have to force it on the students at that age.
And during my entry plan, what I found when I talked to groups of students on the two issues of technology, particularly at the older level, right? They wanted more access to just reliable access, right? I mean, just no matter where they were in the building, can I have more reliable access? And secondly, it was that question of, if we're using this, can we use this? Can we make sure the classes use it? I mean, that was really, right? So they had those two issues, so I would recognize that. I'd also say, Mr. Chairman, last year here we had kids here sharing exactly what they were doing with technology to try to connect it to the curriculum and show people an example. But I do appreciate that's the students, that's what they say too, so I understand that.
It's like consistency, right? They're looking for consistency.
Mrs. Ritchie.
So just building on that, I don't know if it would happen, but there could be a way that being more proactive and more fluid can create cost efficiencies and more effectiveness. It's just something to think about. Yeah, like what we have right here might not, it's working sort of right now, but it might not be what's going to work next year. So I think what I'm saying is I think we're all saying it let's adapt to the times and be able to pivot and shift. And I'm just curious, did you guys create these just for us, or is this something that you envision giving to the community?
No, there's a small number of print for you and for the administrators to have a hard copy. In the spirit of technology, it's an interactive web-based plan, so it's not much use of paper other than for our own consumption and then making meaning.
Okay, thank you.
Mrs. McCammon.
While I agree with a number of things that have been said this evening, I'd like to talk about two things that I find really exciting in this plan. I'm really excited about the explicit tying of curriculum and technology, and I think it's really important, and we need to continue on that path. So thank you for marking it out in the different ways that you've cut curriculum, whether it's embedding embedding digital lesson design or exemplary lessons, and a scope and sequence for technology itself. So I think that's something to celebrate. We've been talking about making that direct tie. The other thing I really like in this is the real focus on collaborative leadership. We've been working for a long time to build, whether it's across, vertically from pre-K through transition, or whether it's, horizontally across all our different kinds of students. So, and amongst our different kinds of teachers and different service providers. So I think those are some things that as a board, again, speaking of values and things we've been looking at, I'd like to call out to celebrate.
Thank you.
Any additional board questions or comments?
Yeah, oh, sorry. I've one more.
Yes, sure, Mrs. McCammon.
It's probably just a little bit of pandemic brain, but in terms of crisis planning, does this plan include what would happen if, for example, our servers went down and all of a sudden we are still running a school, but we don't have access to technology in the way that we thought we would? Does it include that kind of emergency planning, or is that happening somewhere? All of a sudden, we've got a great digital day planned, but our whole building can't access it. What do we do?
So it depends on which program we're using, because when our server's down, that means it depends on if it's hosted on our server or if it's something that's off our server. So it just depends.
Okay.
And there's never going to be a consistent way, because sometimes something that is not on our server is down, like
Sure.
Zoom can be down.
Sure.
And when we do that, to have a backup plan or an emergency plan, there's so many contingencies. I'm not sure what that would be exactly. One thing that we can have is asynchronous learning ready to go, which is not anyone's favorite,
Right.
teachers or students alike. But in worst case scenarios, that's the path we would have to go. And Dr. Magette, again, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
No, I think that's right, but I think that Ms. McCammon is also asking about our disaster plan, if you will. And I know that Mr. Adams has been working on that. It's not quite ready for release, but as soon as it ends, that is something that we would link in to this plan. So he is working on that, what happens in worst case scenarios. But as Mr. Tramberg said, we really have to have some other things in our pocket ready to go. For example, the state network, the entire state network, went down last week for 6 minutes and then came back. And then 5 minutes later, it went down again for a few minutes. It just so happened that those two little slots of time happened while our elementary students were finishing up one of their state tests. So they were able to go back in and everything worked according to plan. But those things do come up. Zoom does go down, Google sometimes goes down. So we just have to plan around that as best we can. But the other thing for the true crisis recovery, that is being worked on.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. McCammon. Any other board comments or questions? All right, thank you again for the presentation. Moving along, we'll move to solar panel proposal, presentation and action, Connecticut Green Bank, and I'm sure Mr. Lynch, thank you for staying.
Here, you want this one?
Are they ready to present? So as part of the facilities committee, the discussion about putting solar on possibility on some of the buildings has been an ongoing discussion. They had a company come back to discuss like a PPE agreement and what that would mean for savings with ZRAC credits and so on. And since then, Mike and Rich, we've been working through the Connecticut Green Bank, and I'll let Mike do a wee bit of introduction. Members of the Connecticut Green Bank are here this evening. This has gone through the facilities committee. So before you is a proposal to put it on Henley Homes and Royal whenever the buildings, the actual roofs are put on. But with that, Mike, can you just sort of frame it and introduce our colleagues? For our colleagues who have been hanging on, thank you for hanging in. I know the meeting has been exhilarating but appreciate your time. And Mike, can you just go make a few comments, please?
Sure. The Connecticut Green Bank is a quasi-government agency that it assists the state entities with and individuals with alternative energy packages to save them money. The town used the Connecticut Green Bank a few years ago to assist them in their solar project. We were waiting. Our solar project is going to follow behind several roof replacement programs we're doing throughout the district. And during that time of waiting, the Green Bank has come up with a program called the Solar Municipal Assistance Program, which is, we were introduced to it by Rusty Schreiner, one of the members of the Oxford Building Committee. So he arranged our first meeting with these people from the Green Bank, and it's led to where we are today with the proposal you'll see tonight. And that's it for me.
Could I just mention that there was a presentation and a letter of intent as part of the packet. We're just passing out an updated version. There was just a minor few corrections that were made by the Green Bank, and we also had our attorney review the letter of intent. So there's a few corrections which you'll see under. It's marked up so you can see what the changes were made. So you'll see that and we'll post these for our public. These are the new versions. A couple of minor corrections because the subcommittee asked for a couple of updates, and they've been incorporated into this presentation. So with that, Mike, do you want to introduce our colleagues here? They're here. Okay, right there.
They're right there.
Who would like who would like to do some introductions here, Mackie, or I'm not. I don't know who else is actually doing the actual discussion.
Emily's there.
Who is there? Emily?
Yes,
Emily.
can you guys hear me okay?
Oh, there you are, Emily, right there in the corner. Yes. Good evening and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. I do have slides. I don't know if you guys are going to show them or if I should present them. Oh,
Michelle?
there we go.
No, they should be there.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, good evening, everyone. I'm Emily Basham from the Connecticut Green Bank. I'm joined by my colleagues Mackie Dykes and team members Fiona Stewart and Alan Sabins from the Solar Map program. So tonight we're going to be just giving a brief overview of who we are, what our program is and offers for towns and cities across Connecticut, and the projects that we have scoped just at a high level so far. Next slide. So the Solar Municipal Assistance Program is a Connecticut Green Bank program. We've partnered with CSW Energy. Alan Sabins is on the line from them, and they are technical partners. They have a lot of experience working with municipalities to develop solar portfolios. Next slide. And we are the Connecticut Green Bank. We're a quasi-public state agency. We were created by the legislature in 2011 to provide financing for clean energy projects. So our goal is through our financing programs to deploy as much clean energy as possible, supporting towns and cities to hit their clean energy goals as well as the state. Next slide. So we've been financing projects, working with dozens of municipalities to do projects through our power purchase agreement, which I can touch on shortly. And through that experience, we have realized that it's valuable to provide some additional support earlier on in the process, not just financing projects, but also scoping and identifying where those opportunities are. So that's why we created the Solar Municipal Assistance Program. It's 2 years old to help towns just evaluate their buildings and schools, find those projects, and then provide support to actually develop those projects all the way through. Next slide. The next slide provides kind of the steps of the program, just to scope out projects. Don't see it. There we go. Thank you. So we meet with towns. We understand, what their history is looking at solar, gather some initial data, do on-site visits, and then put together conceptual designs of where we think the best opportunities are for solar projects. And that's where we're at now. We've got some a preliminary review of where we have identified really great projects that will produce savings. So at this point, we're presenting those to the committee, to the board, and with your green light, we will continue to develop these projects even further, which would mean securing the state incentives that are available for these types of projects through the utilities, and then also running an RFP for a construction partner, a competitive process, which we do in the fall. That piece is also would include other Connecticut towns and cities that we're working with kind of concurrently along the same timeline. So we're bundling, any projects that Darien Schools would move forward with those other towns as well, so we can present a large portfolio of projects to put out to bid, garnering some competitive pricing, and gives us the ability to pass on very attractive savings for these projects. So that's the next two steps that we would embark on with your permission. And then once those are complete, we would come back to the board this fall with final numbers. So tonight we've just got some high level, very conservative numbers with the information we have. Once we move forward, getting those incentives, getting the construction costs, we would return back with hard PPA numbers and savings numbers. So that's kind of the general scope of what we do through the MAP program and what we've been eyeing for Darien. Next slide. And I've got a couple slides on how a power purchase agreement works. There are, a number of ways for cities and towns to go solar. This particular way is a power purchase agreement where the town is not buying a solar system. They are simply purchasing the electricity that is coming off of a system that will be located on your schools. So the Green Bank's power purchase agreement, the Green Bank and our partners actually own the system. We're responsible for constructing and managing the system, and Darien would just be buying the electricity that comes off of those panels. Next slide. And really the benefit here is that we're offering you solar power, solar electricity at a cheaper rate than what you're buying from the grid. So that's the value, is the cost savings of switching from grid power to solar power, kind of illustrated in this chart. Next slide. Just a couple of other things to highlight that are benefits to using a power purchase agreement, particularly for cities and towns. There are no upfront costs. There's not a capital expenditure that we're requesting because the Green Bank owns these systems. So we're providing all the capital to construct them, to monitor them, and manage them for the life of the system. And Darien would really just be locking in a lower electricity rate for 20 years. So the PPA rate that we would bring to you in the fall is a fixed rate. It would stay the same for 20 years. And as utility costs escalate over that time, your savings would grow. That delta would grow, illustrated in pink on the screen. Another important piece is that there are pretty rich federal tax credits for these projects. And since the town does not pay those, that's a benefit that's left on the table, so to speak. So the Green Bank, through the power purchase agreement, we're able to actually capture those tax credits monetize them and pass them along to Darien through these lower electricity rates. And then, of course, we're owning it, so we're responsible for maintaining it. That means, the town wouldn't have to worry about any repairs that would be needed during the PPA term. So those are some important benefits to keep in mind. Next slide. And our friends in Coventry, they have been able to take advantage of those benefits. They've used the Green Bank's PPA to finance 8 systems across their town buildings and schools, varying from rooftop projects to some carports. So we've got a great case study on them that we could link you guys in with if you're interested in more information on the town of Coventry. Next slide. I believe, yep, this is our results from last year. Was the first year we offered kind of this turnkey technical assistance to towns. We worked with 5 towns across the state, kind of all the way through the program. We've developed 16 projects, about 3.5 megawatts of solar in total. And what we were able to offer those towns were a discount that ranged from about 20% to 60% of a discount from their current grid rate, their utility rate. So we're really happy with those results, and we were really happy to see that kind of bundling towns together, putting all of their projects together really helped us lock in lower PPA rates and deliver some great savings to towns last year. So we're excited to do it again this year with a great kind of cohort of towns. So with that, I will turn it over to Mackie to just give an overview of the projects that we have identified for Darien.
Great. Thank you, Emily. Good evening, everyone. Thanks again for having us. My name is Mackie Dykes. I'm the Vice President of Financing Programs here at the Connecticut Green Bank. I'm going to walk us through the project out at a few of your elementary schools. Next slide. And then one more. Great. So start with Hindley Elementary School. So I think, as was mentioned earlier, for all these projects, we're coming in behind a series of re-roofings that are they're not full doing all the roofs. So you'll see a lot of open space here in the visual that you see to the right. But for all these projects, we're just going on where the new roofs are. So what we're looking at here, and what we'll be seeing for each of these projects is to the right is a visual of where the proposed solar system would go. As I mentioned, this here you can see it's just confined to a small piece of the new roof here. To the left are the project details. So we've got the size of the system. In this case, it's 55 kilowatts. We also estimate the annual production from the system. So over the course of the year, what we can expect the system to produce from a kilowatt hour perspective. And I'm going to skip down to the bottom. You see the percent solar offset to utility. So in this case, it's 25%. What that number represents is we look at the overall electrical usage of the building over the course of the year, and what that percentage is, what percent the solar production will offset of that usage. So in this case, the 67,000 kilowatt hours that we expected to produce represents about 25% of the usage for this electric meter. You're currently paying just under 11 cents, at 10.7 cents per kilowatt hour for your utility electricity. We for each site we get an electric bill and figure out what that sort of all-in rate. So that's generation plus any kilowatt hour based transmission and delivery. we add all those up because that's what, under a PPA, that's what you'd be avoiding purchasing. You're instead buying solar electricity as opposed to the utility power. So as Emily mentioned, at this point, we don't have what the actual PPA rate would be. The key input for that is what this system would cost to build. And we won't know that until we do the RFP. So, we can't expect you to move forward with something without some sort of expectation or framework for what the savings might look like. So what we do is take all these inputs that I just walked through and come up with just a very conservative savings scenario. We run our numbers on, we assume a very conservative build cost for the system. And we figure out, can we deliver at least a 10% savings to what you're paying on your utility rate? The thinking being, at minimum 10% is it's not, unless we can deliver at least that, it's not worth everyone's time to go through all this. So we want to make sure we can meet that. As Emily mentioned, last round we delivered at least a 20% across the board, and up to 60% in many cases. So again, I just want to reiterate, these are conservative assumptions on the savings side, just to again make sure that we think we can hit that. So next slide. With all that said, here are the numbers. So what we do is we take what a 10% discount would be to your utility rate. So as mentioned, that's 10.7 cents. The PPA rate would be 9.1 cents. So your savings for every kilowatt hour is the difference between those two numbers, because you're avoiding purchasing the 10.7 cent power. Instead, you're buying the solar power for 9.1 cents. So we take that difference and we multiply it by the annual production. And here you see the term savings for this particular project is just under 50,000, and the average annual savings is to almost 2,500. I should point out here, actually, in this case, we figured 10% is our minimum threshold. In this case, we thought, given a 9.1 cent PPA is actually pretty high, and a 15% discount is a conservative estimate in this case. So we went ahead and for this project and a few of the others, we did we sort of established the 15% baseline. Next slide. Great. Okay. So here we've got Holmes Elementary School.
So Mackie, in the interest of everyone's time as the 10 o'clock hour approaches, I don't, if it's all right with the board, I don't think you have to go through each of these additional schools. I think the detail you went through on the one school, all these other slides are the same, but the numbers are different, and the board does get this package. So I would move through to the next conversation you want to have with us.
Great.
I think
Thank you.
we'll ask questions around these particular slides, but no need to go through the individual schools. Thank you, though.
Great, thank you. Let's skip to slide 19 then, if we can. So that summarizes all the savings from the schools. Again, the conservative estimates, we don't have Oxbridge because we don't know what the rate would be there. So yeah, this is in total, the expected savings, setting aside Oxbridge. Next slide. So let me hand it over to Emily here then to talk through the next steps.
Yes, as the chair and Mike mentioned, we have a letter of intent before you, which is a non-binding agreement. Simply allows all of us to kind of get on the same page, present the work that we've done so far, and propose moving forward with these projects to continue to develop them. So that's what the letter of intent does for us, is allows us to move forward with the next step, which is submitting for utility incentives. So that next step is due June 14th is when the utility incentives close for this year. So that's our deadline we're headed towards. Once we submit for utility incentives, we would then run the RFP for contractor partners in the fall, return back to the board in about Q4 of this year to execute a power purchase agreement with construction starting in Q1 of next year, 2022. So that is our next steps and timeline. So I think with that, we can take any questions that the board might have.
Great, Emily. Thank you. Thank you for all the detail, and I know you did a nice job at the Facilities Committee meeting, so I appreciate that. I'll open it up for board questions. Mr. Brown.
Hi, thank you very much. Quick question. I'm looking at the term savings on page 19. Has anybody discounted that back, the 410, doing an NPV on that? I'm just wondering what today's number is. Would be question one. If you don't have it, that's fine. If you could circulate that, would be appreciated. Next, in paragraph number 8, there was an ad, I guess, by our attorney adding "or controls," which flags me down to paragraph 12, where we're talking about granting an irrevocable, non-exclusive license or easement. I just defer to Attorney Fox or Attorney Mooney. Can we grant a non-exclusive, irrevocable license or easement to property we control? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mr. Lynch, is that a takeaway question for you?
I would let the attorney answer that question.
Yep. Well, yeah, I mean, you understand the question. You can
Yes.
follow up with the attorney.
Yes.
Great. I guess, Mr. Lynch and Emily, my question is, from the Facilities Committee meeting, there was a discussion about all the buildings except this building, which seemed to be a challenge. But this proposal would be for all the school buildings, knowing Ox Ridge is under construction, and that would be at a future date?
It's the 4 buildings
Yeah.
behind you for now.
Right. So why is that?
Well, the other roofs aren't being done at this point. There's a couple years out, there's going to be the Middlesex roof. There's going to be the remaining parts of Holmes and Hindley, and the rest of Ox Ridge will be built at that point. And the ZREC program is changing after this year. So, you know, that there's a limit on what you present in a proposal. You have a time frame to get it done.
Yep.
And,
Okay.
it expires. We don't hit that time frame
Good.
with
Thank
the other
you.
buildings.
Mrs. Ritchie.
So just to be clear, so the roofs at DHS and MMS are older, and they're going to probably need to be replaced, and therefore they don't fall into the timeline
Of this project.
but they could be a future project.
That's correct.
Along with
Hopefully, yes.
Tokenique.
Yes.
Okay, and then during the Facilities Committee meeting, I think it was Dave asked for some financial information about comparing us owning the solar panels versus this current proposal. Was that information provided? Did I understand that correctly?
Mr. Sini?
I asked that question and it was answered because of the tax credit. The hurdle was, it wasn't even a comparable. It wasn't.
Okay,
worth it.
so
The
there
tax
was
credit-
there was no spreadsheet
No.
provided. Okay.
No,
I
no.
just-
It was asked and answered at the Finance Committee based on the tax.
Yeah, the
credits.
tax credit is huge and you
Yeah.
can't
Yeah.
replicate that in any other setting.
Okay.
Good question. Thanks. Mr. Maroney.
This is kind of a non-pertinent to this, but it's just a question. I see that in the agreement that you will, system installation, operations, maintenance, and removal shall comply. I'm just curious as to what happens in the removal of solar panels. Are they recyclable? Do they go into the dump, or what happens to them?
Well, they are recyclable because we're looking at it with the existing solar panel system that's at Ox Ridge right now. There are also countries that buy used solar panels and reuse them, you know, selling them small. Third world countries that don't really have a stable electrical grid in many parts of the country, they buy old solar panels and they set up a little battery system, keep people's like refrigerator running at night and stuff like that. Just very simple little system. So there is use for them. They won't buy them from you, but they're not throwing them in a landfill.
I think that was my question. Just
Yeah.
so, you know, feels like before you do something where you feel like you're doing something good for the environment, and then 20 years later, you're causing more harm. So just
And I
wanted
think
to understand.
But to that point, the question around Ox Ridge too, which they're still working through, is the cost of taking the system out was prohibitive to, regardless of selling them or someone wanting to buy them, you know, there was no money to be made, so to speak, but we wanted to do the right thing with them environmentally. Mrs. Ritchie?
So
I wanted clarification on the timing, because in Mike's memo to us, it said Hindley and Holmes would be this fall, and then Royal and Oxridge would be fall of '22, but it seems like the timing might be a little bit different in the packet that we got, so I just wanted to clarify that.
Well, I think the package from Emily has it spread out a little more. You know, it's like, you know, the Army, the infantry moves as fast as the slowest walker. So,
So
you know, we're kind of
is
stuck a little behind. You know, we might want to go right away. You're like, hey, our roofs are done in August, let's go.
Right.
But, you know, there might be one of the groups of towns and municipalities we're working with that's a little further behind, so we're, you know.
So it's gonna be pushed out a little bit.
A little bit, yeah, but it's the type of work, as long as there's no snow on the roof, they can be up there working. So it's not really all year, but close to.
Okay, thanks.
Good. Any other further questions or comments?
So,
Sure, Mr.
So what do
Senior.
they need tonight, a vote to move forward on a letter of intent? Is that
Correct, that's where I was
understood?
headed after, yeah, yep. So is the board comfortable with moving forward with the letter of intent? And do I have a motion to move forward with the letter of intent? Mrs. Parent, second by Mr. Sini. All those in favor? That is unanimous. So we will move forward with the letter of intent. Thank you for your presentation at the Facilities Committee and this evening. And Mr. Lynch, thanks for all the work behind the scenes. I'll do a shout out to Mr. Schreiner, who I know is helping behind the scenes also. So thank you.
And Mr. Rudel ran these.
And Mr.
numbers
Rudel
quite a
always
bit.
is behind the numbers. So anything else on your end, Emily?
Nope, that's it. Thank you for your support. We appreciate it.
Great. Well, thank you and your team for joining us this evening and hanging on with us. We appreciate it. Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you,
Great.
guys, and
Thank you.
we'll circle back with you tomorrow. Thank you. Thank you very much.
So we will move along. Discussion and possible acceptance of contemplated gift from the Hindley PTO. Dr. Adley and Mrs. Droller.
I see Mrs. Stroller there, and we have a story walk proposal. I'll let her speak to it.
I think in the interest of time, everyone has read through it. It's
Okay.
kind of fascinating and fun, and I love the concept. And I did read through and see that it is movable as eventually we start construction there. So I would open it up, not to take away from the excitement, but I've got a lot of people here at 10 o'clock at night that have to go to work tomorrow.
Sounds like a
So,
plan.
are there any questions or comments about this very generous gift from the PTO? Mrs. Parent?
I just wanted to thank the Hindley PTO for this. I think this is a great use of PTO funds. I always think that the PTO is the nice to haves versus the needs to have, and this is an excellent use of that. So thank you all for this gift.
I will second that. Thank you for Mrs. Parent from the board for the PTO. Our PTOs are incredibly generous, and it seemed fun, it seemed whimsical. I liked the whole concept, so thank you very much. So I'll have a motion to move forward with the accepted gift. Mr. Brown, second by Mr. Sini. All those in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you very much. Thanks for hanging on, Julie. We appreciate it. And again, thanks to the PTO for this very generous gift.
Thank you.
We will keep moving. The first reading of the proposed 2022-2023 Darien school calendar. Dr. Adley.
Yeah, so it is as proposed. You can see it. We tried to align to the districts that we are aware of that have come out at this particular point. New Canaan, Wilton, Greenwich. Those are the ones that have published at this particular point. So we've tried to keep that alignment. And I think we're consistent with past practice and desires of the board in terms of from February vacations through April vacations. I did take off the bottom of the actual calendar proposal. It talked about the state requirement to wait after a certain date in April. You don't have to anymore to set graduation. I have just stayed here that we'll do it no later than the 1st just to keep us honest to the process, but you don't have to do that anymore. I have not put in the PLC times. So moving forward, we're going to be looking at an accreditation visit at the high school pretty soon. So we're going to actually at the next board meeting give an update to the board on accreditation. And so we're learning what the requirements of that are in terms of you have to do a whole preparation and you have to give dedicated time to staff to actually do that preparation. So we'll have to look and see how that plays into the calendar. But for now, I'm looking at the main dates to make sure that there's any feedback from the board either now at the next meeting just about the calendar, the holiday dates and so on.
Thank you, Dr. Adley. So again, a first reading. Any comments? Mr. Sini?
Just a quick question. How are we handling snow days next year?
Oh, actually, I listed next year or this.
I'm sorry, whatever. This.
Well, yeah, so I just put on here, so I put on that we would do 2 snow days. Hopefully, like a snow day is not like a storm day. That we do 2 snow days and then do some online learning days. Figured to try and hedge my bets a wee bit for the kids.
Awesome. Thank you. Mrs. Ritchie?
So is that something the state has supported, or is that something that we can do with, are we doing that in consultation with the State Board of Education? So
yeah, they're supporting.
Okay, great. I wanted to mention something that I often think about when we set the calendar. And I know Labor Day looks like it's kind of late for this school year, but giving them a full week of school prior to Labor Day just feels painful to me. But you know, it is what it is, because then
June.
yeah, then you're going further into June. But a full week of school before Labor Day just seems harsh. But I don't know if there's anything we can do about it based on how late Labor Day is for that particular year.
That tends to be a pattern now, actually, to get more of the school days in before the end of the school year. So
I also think it's harder for the younger kids to have, you know, especially for that K, if you have a K orientation on a Thursday and then they go a full day on Friday and then they have to come back following Tuesday, that's really hard for the younger kids. So
This is, or the?
Good point.
Any of them are?
no, I think having a full week is more beneficial for the younger kids.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? That is a first reading, so that will come back to us. Thank you. Moving on to further discussion and action on educational specifications for proposed renovation plans for Hindley Homes and Royal School. So we are.
Make a motion to amend the agenda, this item.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yep.
to add to that, the request to the Board of, to add a request to the Board of Selectmen to create the building committee or committees for proposed renovations to Hindley Homes and Royal.
Okay. Do I have a second for that? Mrs. Stein? Mr. Brown? All in favor? That is unanimous. Great. Thank you, Mrs. McCammon. So we had some questions, and I know there were some tweaks and updates. So any additional questions or comments around the ed specs for Hindley, for Homes, or for Royal? Again, thank you to the administration and everyone that's worked hard behind the scenes on this. It's exciting to kind of have this project here. It's been mentioned a couple of times this evening, so we're moving it forward. So questions, Mrs. Parent?
I just had an interesting conversation with a couple of building committee members on Saturday at the ceremony, and they were mentioning the kitchen, that they were moving to a more sustainable model where there were real dishwashers and moving to flatware and stuff. Is that something that can be incorporated into these schools, or is that a completely separate project?
I haven't had that discussion, so that's kind of new to me a little bit. So I'll have to look at it. I don't know, Mike, have you any?
So just the new kitchen at Ox Ridge being where there's dishwashers and there's like real flatware and real trays as opposed to the disposable things that currently are being used at elementary levels. Is there any way to include those into the new schools? I mean, I know we're not touching the cafeterias for these, but is that something that's on anybody's radar?
No, it's not. I do know that the building committee and the architect, when they met quite a bit, they were meeting with the former food service manager, not the current company that's running the food service. So it's probably something we have to circle back around to, but I remember that was something that was wanted. I don't, you know, there's only been a preliminary list of the kitchen equipment made so far.
So I think that moves into a discussion, Mr. Lynch and I have had, that's phase 2 of the building up there. So I think now that Chartwell's on board, those meetings will pursue. It's a great question. Rich, I would just throw it over to you that, is there anything we should be or could be doing with Chartwell with these other cafeterias? And, you know, nothing to answer tonight. Let's stay on focus here, but I would just toss it over to you that it's a good point, and I don't know what Chartwell's plans are, but let's table it for another topic, but it makes sense. Thanks.
So these specifications have been updated, Mr. Chairman, with the musical instrumental room, so that's consistent across the schools.
Good. Thank you.
That was my question.
Any other questions or comments? Good, so we'll move forward. So we will move forward with the motions to approve the ed specs, and then we'll move forward with the motions to move them to the Board of Selectmen. So may I have a motion to approve the proposed educational specifications for the renovation of Royal Elementary School? May I have a motion, Mr. Maroney, second by Mrs. Stein. All in favor? That is unanimous, minus Mrs. Ockman. May I have a motion we just did Royal, so may I have a motion to request that the Darien Board of Selectmen create a building committee to oversee the renovation of Royal Elementary School, and that such building committee, known henceforth as the 2021 Royal Elementary School Building Committee, be authorized to renovate Royal Elementary School in accordance with the educational specifications for Royal Elementary School as approved by the Darien Board of Education on May 25th, 2021. May I have a motion? Mr. Sini, second. Yep.
Sorry, we're doing separate building committees for each project, is that correct?
That's to be discussed by the
Okay,
building
but our
committee.
motion is to request.
Our motion is to move it forward to the selectmen.
And are we requesting of them separate building committees?
I think that will be a topic of discussion, and I know the first selectman's gonna work with some folks on the Oxbridge Building Committee to talk through that as to whether it should look like one building committee with subsections or separate building committees.
So tonight, are we approving three separate motions? Are we doing three separate motions for each, one for each school?
Yep.
Okay.
All right, so that was the motion for Royal.
We needed a second.
I needed a second. Mr. Maroney, all in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you. Motion to approve the proposed educational specifications for the renovation of Hilney Elementary School. Motion, Mr. Brown, second by Ms. Ritchie. All in favor? That is unanimous, minus Mrs. Ockman. A motion now to request that the Darien Board of Selectmen create a building committee to oversee the renovation of Hinley Elementary School, and that such building committee, known henceforth as the 2021 Hinley Elementary School Building Committee, be authorized to renovate Hinley Elementary School in accordance with the educational specifications for Hinley Elementary School as approved by the Darien Board of Education, May 25th, 2021. Mr. Maroney made the motion, Mr. Brown second. All in favor? That is unanimous, minus Mrs. Ockman. A motion to approve the proposed educational specifications for the renovation of Holmes Elementary School. Motion, Mr. Sini, second by Mr. Brown. All in favor? Move that forward unanimously, minus Mrs. Ockman. And then the motion to request that the Darien Board of Selectmen create a building committee to oversee the renovation of Holmes Elementary School, and that such building committee, now henceforth as the 2021 Holmes Elementary School Building Committee, be authorized to renovate Holmes Elementary School in accordance with the educational specifications for Holmes Elementary School as approved by the Darien Board of Education, May 25th, 2021. Mr. Brown, motion, Mr. Maroney, second. All in favor? That is unanimous. Good, thank you all. We are moving that forward. That's exciting. I think there will be discussions about the building and the look and the feel of the building committees, a little different than building a new school. Not so much design work as to just trying to match brick in the existing facade of the schools, but the next conversations will be around what the building committee looks like. So thank you. And I thank the whole community and all the work that's gone on behind the scenes to get us to this point. So thank you very much. Congratulations. Moving along, Board of Education Communications Work Group, Mrs. Jill McCammon. Thank you, Mr. Lynch.
Thank you, Mr.
Thanks
Lynch.
for staying with us. Safe home. So just to tee this up, and Jill and Dennis and Dave have worked behind the scenes. As I said, a lot of information went out. They're going to focus kind of on a high level. The original charge of the communications group was to look at communications and work with the board to see kind of what we need to do, what lessons we've learned from COVID. Some of us have been on the board longer than others, and we talk a lot about communications, but maybe it's time to kind of look at some of the communications we do at the board level, at the district level. So some behind the scenes work has been done from a work group standpoint. I think we need to hear more from all the board members as we go forward, and maybe continue the conversation at the next board meeting, and then do some prioritization of the work we want done and how we want that work to look in terms of the work group, or have a conversation about a committee, and put that on the agenda from a board retreat standpoint. So, but the board charged the group with this some time ago. They've met. There's been a lot on the district's plate, on the administration's plate, on the board's plate. So, but it's time to kind of start the dialogue around that. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jill. You're going to lead the conversation with Dennis and Dave.
Yep. So again, we were a work group, so we did actually most of our work. I think there was a couple of meetings early on before November, but then most of what we did was tossing around ideas on a document back and forth, just to kind of get a sense of what was going on. So with that, Dennis is going to pick it up and just remind us of where we started with the charge. And I have the remote, so I will see if I know how to do it.
Clearly not.
So, I mean, I think Duke summed up the charge, but just to refine and restate, it was to define communication concerns or opportunities and consider whether the formation of a communications committee would be appropriate. And so we came up with 4 key questions to it. The first one is, which work or concerns fall under the umbrella of communication? And I think that works of just board to state, board to board, board to different social media. There's a lot of underlying parts to that. Which aspects of communication belong to the board and which to the administration? I think that's fairly self-explanatory. Do we have the right infrastructure in place to handle the increased speed of communication and use of social media? And how does communication in a crisis differ from everyday communication? I think when you're in a crisis, you see if you don't have a good foundation, the cracks will quickly develop and things will crumble quickly. And I think we have to, we lived through a crisis this year, and I think we can question whether we have the right communication set up for that.
Thank you. Also, the findings we came away with regarded informal communications and community concerns on social media platforms. Especially, this was highlighted given the pandemic situation, but it was an area of importance before that really prompted the work we were doing. We think that's an area of continued concern. Since then, also, the administration has defined communications as a goal. We think it's important that the board should work hand in hand with the administration to further those goals and objectives in dealing with the community. Also realize that there's no actual time-specific ways to push out information from the board level, and that's something we should consider, especially given the events of the past year. And also, there are numerous informal communication channels, but there's no real standardized approach that board members use. We think that's something we should take a further look at.
So to that end, we came up with a couple sets of prioritized work that we recommend that the board consider taking on in some capacity. So we thought first and foremost to start with a communication plan, so we would all have a common set of expectations about how we communicate and when and via what mechanism or what channel. We recommend that there be a look at any policies that the policy committee should either review or add to ensure that our communication, that our communications are supported by policy. A clear example of that is social media. There are some boards that have actual policy language around the use of social media and for board members. We thought it was important to explicitly, as Dave just said, explicitly support administrative communication work. It's defined in the strategic plan, but to make that a mark. We understand the Board of Selectmen has hired someone to do communication in a part-time capacity, and so wanted to make sure that the board is watching that and paying attention and seeing whether there's any aspect of that would be valuable to us, whether it's work that we repeat or it's the actual use of a resource. And there were some smaller things that we thought we could do to quickly optimize some communication. For example, just reviewing what type of information board members have on the website, whether or not we want to put our pictures on is a very small example. Exploring automating meeting notices just so that, maybe you can subscribe to get your soccer games. It'd be nice also, there are enough board meetings that we could just subscribe. These are just little things. And there was some discussion this year over public hearing versus public comment and how that works and how we interact with the public. So those were our suggestions for work that we thought the board might like to take on, or we recommend the board take on. And so we wanted to bring it here. to ask the board two things. Number one, is this work you want the board to do? And two, if so, how do we want to move forward doing it? We could stay in a work group format. We could form a formal subcommittee. The board could take it on as a whole. There's plenty of options. But that's where we stopped. We didn't, and wanted to bring it here. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you for the presentation. I'll open it up to any board questions or comments. Mrs. Parent.
To me, and I'm just going to be perfectly frank and honest right now, I was really frustrated reading this document that came out on Friday. As a new board member, everything that I've been taught onboarding through CABE, through Mr. Mooney, is that our work is done in public. And I understand it's a work group, but there was a lot of input into here that was beyond the scope of what I understood. And I went back to the September 22nd meeting when this work group was formed, and I watched it a couple times, and some of this work was well beyond that scope, in my opinion. And I really feel strongly going forward that this work has to be done in public with administration involved, so that everybody has a say. Because this is, I think it was really, I was just very frustrated by it.
What?
Mr. Cini.
May I follow up? What about the presentation was outside the scope?
Not the presentation, what was in our packet, and that's public knowledge. It's an email.
But I guess,
So
okay.
I'm not going to get into, thank you for your points, Mrs. Parent. I appreciate that. As I explained, it was a brain dump, it was working notes, it was notes. There's a lot of information that, I've been on the board a long time, and there's a lot of information that was in there that's been discussed over time. They may be topics we want to take up, they may be topics we might not want to take up. It was a working group. They did a brain dump. They fine-tuned it as to what we want to talk about now and how we want to move forward. And as far as I'm concerned, all this work will and has to be done at the board table.
And I'd say going forward, my personal opinion is we need to get away from the working group and either do a subcommittee, communication subcommittee, or as a full board, because it has to be.
That's the question on the table.
Yeah, right, so that's my opinion. Okay.
Mr. Cini?
First of all, I think the idea of refining our communication as a board is awesome, because I just think of recent events, celebrate DHS being named #1 in the state. The board didn't have a voice in that. The district did, but the board didn't. And we should want to celebrate that as a board. To inform constituents. I know we had a vote early on in the fall that was confusing to some, and 4 individual board members wrote a letter to the editor, and it would have been better to present the majority vote and define that as a board, not individual members. And to highlight neat stuff like Dr. Adley on the recent podcast, Now We're Talking Darien. It'd be really neat to use our voice to highlight something like that. So, yeah, I've been on a different commission, and we did some working groups, subcommittee stuff as well. I kind of view it what the board thinks, but to do all this work as a board, I would push that away. It's got to be a smaller group. And then, of course, the board would define the goals, the reach of that subcommittee and or working group, and then make the final decisions on the policies.
Thank you, Mr. Cini. Mrs. Stein?
I guess I sort of differ a little from what Mr. Cini is saying, in that it's hard to sort of unsee what we saw on Friday. So when I look at that and I put my hat on as sort of chair of policy, a lot of it is policy related and work, in my opinion, that stems from the administration or the board as a whole. I think we have to start as a group and dissect that with Tom and Cabe in a retreat. I mean, I think there is, and Alan, actually, I would look to you to sort of guide us in is what they've created, and thank you guys for the work. There are a lot of questions that have percolated up at this table. But I guess fundamentally, I'm curious, as a superintendent, do you see that as your role or our role? Because from everything I've learned from Tom and Cabe, and it's more yours than ours. So I think you have to guide us too, Alan, in this. And I was on the working group in the beginning, and one of the first things Dennis, Dave, and Mike Burke and I did was look at surrounding districts to inform us. And really very few have an actual standalone communications committee. A couple had them as part of their policy committee, or they would describe it as a communication committee, but when you really dug in, it was more policy related. So we have the policy committee. I do think there is a lot of intersection, and I think we need guidance, a lot of guidance from you too, Alan, on how you see this going.
So, guidance, so I just want to be clear on the question you're asking me around communication, whose role is it, or around guidance around how we should approach this?
I think both.
Both.
I mean, I think Jill asked the right question, which is, what are we doing, right? Are we going to be a working group, a committee? Is it the full board? Is it the administration? I think it has to be defined, but, you know, I think a lot of the subsections in the working notes, to me, fall more on administration than on the board.
But I think, before you start, Dr. Adley, the one thing I would say too that I think we have to have at the board level conversation is, and I think, and this is where we have to decide whether we want the group to continue doing a little more work leading up to the retreat, but kind of looking at prioritizing and defining some of the stuff that came out of that and what fits into strategy and what is going to be worked on from a strategy standpoint, Dr. Adley, at the administration level. And if there's some stuff in there that fits into kind of board roles and responsibilities too. But then, you know, as I talk to members on the communication group, to Mrs. Stein's point is how does it impact, or, you know, how does it involve specific policies and stuff like that? So, look, I think we've learned, you know, there's a lot of social media out there. We have to figure out how and when we want to respond to that. And I think just overall communication in general from a board perspective. So I'll let the board finish, Dr. Adley. Turn, Mrs. Ritchie.
So, I mean, it's always been my understanding in conversations with Tom Mooney that we are board members only when we sit at this board table, and when we step away, we are elected officials, but we are no longer board members. So the other thing I want to say is we have policy that's very clear about who the spokesperson of the board is, and that would be our chair and the superintendent. So that is a policy question. If we want to change, I mean, I'm just looking at the first bullet point. So if we're creating a communication plan for the board, are we saying we're now allowing all board members to go out and communicate in various different ways? That sounds like it opens a whole host of issues for me. I appreciate all the work that's gone into the document, and I know we were supposed to push that document aside and just look at the slides, but I already read the document. The document's now in my brain. I see there could be some policy work. I see there's some good points, but I also see that there are some things that are being discussed that aren't related to communications. So I do agree with Mrs. Parent that this is, I always say this, that we do our work at the public board table. We do our work in public. It's fine that there was some work that was done outside of that, but I really feel strongly that from going forward that this work needs to be done by the 9 of us at this board table.
Mr. Brown.
So I would just like to harken back to when we had a vote at this table and it was decided we should have a working group. And I find it a little disingenuous to be subjected to a Kafka trap. This is going on right now. We were charged to do this work. We did this work. If people disagree with the scope, this is the way you asked it to be done, and we did it. The question before us tonight is how do we proceed as a board or as a committee?
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mrs. Ritchie.
So I'll just read the motion as it was approved the night of the 22nd of September. The motion was to convene a working group to study the necessity and function of a communications subcommittee of the board. So I would love for you three to articulate, do you support a communications subcommittee? That was the charge. And what would be the work of that committee? Well,
So I'm sorry, could you reread that?
The motion, as Mike Burke made it on the 22nd, was to convene a working group to study the necessity and function of a communications subcommittee of the board.
So we did that, and that's the question before us, is do we form a subcommittee? Your question,
Well, I'm asking you, what is your
document, which
recommendation? What is the
that was our
working
work
group
product,
recommendation?
was that the work product that you're questioning that was in the board package is exactly what was asked for in that motion. I really do not understand the indignation.
So let's move forward and discuss from a board perspective. How do we want to move forward with work being done around communication from the board? Do we want the work group to continue to do some work? Do we want to add someone to the work group? Do we want to do some takeaways this evening and then have some follow-up the next board meeting so that we've got some work done before the board retreat? Mrs. Stein?
I mean, I'll reiterate, I personally think we started a retreat, but if it is going to stay as a group, I would ask that we make it a more formal committee with either Marge because of policy or, you know, have administration represented. So that's, you know, I feel like the working group has sort of done their work, and you know, some of the stuff in there, Dave, I think if I want to clarify what I was saying, a lot of it to me is an intersection with policy that needs to be dealt with in a different way, in my opinion. And we can agree to disagree, but there's stuff in there about budget process, other things that I felt were slightly out of scope. But I think we can all agree, everyone here feels like we can move forward in a collaborative way with some either guidance from Tom, Cabe, Marge, Alan. You know, I think it's at the point where we need administration or school representation.
No, I think you're exactly right, Katie, and it's a good point. I mean, this was a study, as we were asked to do, and there's things that some people may think fit, some people think don't. But you know, personally, if I was going to make a motion, I would propose that we move and have a subcommittee to explore this further, whether that's part of policy or its own standalone. I'm agnostic, but as a member of the working group, that would be my recommendation at this time.
Dr. Adley? Mr. Cini?
Sorry, I would support the subcommittee. I just want to make sure that we're not overwhelming, you know, administration with another subcommittee, and if maybe there's a way, we can throw it in policy and add it, you know. We're getting in the nomenclature, but a working group of the policy committee. I get it, this stuff intersects, guys, but I definitely don't want to sit here as 9 of us, you know, creating recommendations, okay? So, I mean, I wholeheartedly oppose the 9 of us figuring this all out. I mean, you have trust and faith in a subcommittee of some sort or a working group of a subcommittee and get this done.
Although I would say if we started with a retreat, I guess my vision is it's a launching point where we can get guidance from, and Alan, you can have some time to think about it. You know, I sort of put you on the spot tonight, but also Tom is generally at our retreats, or Cabe, to just get us set and answer those questions as a group of 9. What do we want to do overarching, and how are we going to execute it in terms of structure?
So I think to Mrs. Stein's point, I think it gives us time as a board, as the 9 members, to what's been read is read. The work was done. A lot of thought was given to it. There's nothing in there that I haven't thought about or talked about in the 7+ years that I've been on the board too. So what I think we have to do is we can look at that work, or we can look at the comments, but come up with our own thoughts and ideas that we can bring to the table to have a thoughtful conversation. And at the end of the day, it has to be prioritized. You can't get everything done all at once. So what are the priorities we want to tackle? But then I think we need to understand, Dr. Adley, from you and the administration, you're ending school. There's going to be a busy summer getting school ready. Hopefully it looks rather normal, but just understanding the capacity that you have. But I think we can help with that by the board members doing the work between now and the retreat of prioritizing their thoughts of what specifically they think a communications subgroup should focus on. I don't know if you want to add anything there, Dr. Adley.
Do you want to go first?
No, go ahead.
Okay, no, so now that I've seen this over the weekend, right? And so this is my opportunity to sort of reflect on the document. What Ms. Stein says is actually correct in the sense of my experience of communication subcommittees. They tend to be tagged on to another committee. It might be, my goodness, it might be curriculum and communication, might be curriculum and, or it might be communications and technology, or whatever or communications and policy actually it tends to be. I would say my experience has been it's got less of attention in that scenario, right? But I'd like the opportunity to reflect on this a little bit, and also administratively to sort of share some perspectives that might be helpful. I would say that I would tend to agree that the retreat sessions are the best time to actually do some of this stuff, because I think there is areas for ourselves and for yourselves, and also working together in terms of because there's areas where I think we could probably make some improvements along the way. And as we've been, I say this very affectionately, be careful what you wish for, right? I think we have to commit to the things that we say we're going to do, right, around communication. That would apply to myself as it would apply to the board members. But I do think that retreat is the session. I'm happy to reflect upon this and comment at the next meeting about how I would think it'd be best to proceed. I'm just processing this relatively for the first time. But typically, the retreat session is a time to do that and to establish policy, practice, evaluation, and do you want to put another committee in place, so on and so forth.
I think that makes sense. I would just ask again that the board does the work ahead of time and spends time to read and think about, those of us that have been on a long time, these topics and these items that come up repeatedly, and then some lessons learned over the last 18 months from a COVID perspective. So that way, the session at the retreat can be productive about what we want to zero in and focus on. Mrs. McCammon.
Well, I think I would just say that, I think the work, just in wrapping up, I think the work group strongly felt that we do need to put some attention on communications, not necessarily permanently over time, but that we do need to do some work in the short term, just to clean some things up. And again, these are suggestions of what we thought should be prioritized or would recommend. But, we're certainly open to how that work gets done. Thank you.
So I think, Dr. Adley, again, if you're agreeable to it, if by the next meeting, the one thing I would like to, and I'll go back through it too, I think we all should do is think about, from a communication standpoint, what's tied into the strategic plan, so that we know, and we're not going to carve that out or have different discussions about that, because a lot of time and energy was spent on the strategic plan and building in there some communication components. So we'll do the homework around that. All right, any other questions or comments? Great, thank you for the conversation. So you're going to give us some thoughts at the next board meeting, and then we'll have it as an agenda item as we build out the retreat schedule. So we will move to discussion on April 22.
Sorry, just one.
Sure.
We don't have a date set for our summer retreat, do we?
Dr. Adley is working on some dates and is going to get a Google out.
No, we don't. It's going to be in Switzerland, right?
Yeah, right? There you go.
We're going to have Christina plan that for us.
Sounds great.
So discussion on April 2020-2021 financial report, possible action on proposed budget transfers. Mr. Rudel, I know Mrs. Achman had to leave, but there was a finance committee meeting and the usual good conversation about everything that's going on financial and all the transfers, but I'll turn it over to Mr. Rudel.
So this is the financial report through April. We are forecasting a year-end surplus of $1,125,704, or just over 1%. The general education RCs are a positive $468,000. Special education RCs are a positive $759,000, with about half of that being excess cost. And then reopening expenditures are a deficit of $102,000, giving us our $1.1 million. Reopening expenditures stand at about $3.6 million. We have received grants of just shy of 1.1. There's been transfers of about $688,000, and then we did receive a supplemental appropriation of $1.7 million. Some of the changes from the last forecast in the reopening expenditures leading to our deficit: adjustment to the Director of Nursing for the COVID compliance liaison, some additional funds for contact tracing for the nurses and athletic trainers. We have canceled our weekend cleaning contract effective June 1st, which is a positive balance. The school lunch deficit of $98,000, and that's largely a product of being remote after spring break week. Some savings in the lunch monitors due to being remote for that week, and then a small balance in technology equipment. Some changes in our prior forecast. I won't go through all of them, but highlighting a small change in out-of-district tuition settlements. The excess cost reimbursement has been adjusted down by the state from 80.7 to 80.31, and we do expect to get that balance of revenue this week. Small adjustment down in utilities, and then to the positive, district legal fees continue to trend positive. We've had some salary savings in the special education secretary and special education paras and some athletic coaches, and then some additional funds in athletic transportation. Salaries are a positive $411,000. Interns again remain positive at $45,000. Clubs and councils again at positive $18,000. Salary savings or turnover of $313,000. Contract support due to favorable non-certified contracts at $48,000. Nurse substitutes are trending positive at $6,500, and then reopening cost to the negative $20,611. Operating costs are a positive $387,000. Legal fees continue to trend positive at about $59,000. We are carrying that favorable balance from winter sports for sports officials. Athletic transportation, tuition reimbursement is less than budget of $8,700. Small amounts of money in ADA sport, audit, materials and dues of $4,900. Adult ed contractual service did come in under budget by $4,500. Special education transportation continues to be positive at $178,000. Special education tuition remains positive at $121,000. And again, those COVID reopening expenditures, a deficit of $81,000, which is primarily that school lunch account. Fixed costs are a positive $40,000. Regular transportation remains positive of about $56,000. That is primarily savings from diesel fuel from not having as many bus runs and remote days. Health insurance remains negative about $65,000. And then utilities, which is electricity, heat, sewer, are all positive by about $41,000. Equipment is pretty minor at positive $315,000. The bulk of that is COVID equipment, which is that technology equipment I referenced earlier. Revenue is a positive $286,000. Again, the bulk of that is excess costs, which is $374,000 above budget, and that is a product of a reimbursement rate of 80.31%, which is one of the highest reimbursement rates in a number of years. So there are 3 transfers for consideration. The first is $98,747 going into consultant services into COVID. This is to cover a projected school lunch deficit due to the remote days and hybrid learning days that we've had. We are recommending taking it from COVID savings associated with transportation and officials. $22,500 for nurse and athletic trainer contact tracing, and we are recommending taking those funds from lower substitute costs. And then diesel savings from transportation. And then director of nursing is a COVID to COVID transfer, but we did want to put this forward. And we are recommending taking that from the savings from canceling the weekend cleaning contract.
Thank you, Mr. Rudel. Any questions or comments from the board? Mrs. Ritchie.
Yeah, in our meeting, we spoke about the nurse contact tracing transfer. So maybe you could just review that for the full board so they
Sure.
understand how that is going to work.
So there's 3 pieces to it. It is a $2,000 stipend for every nurse at the secondary level. So there's 3 at the high school and 3 at the middle school. So that's $12,000 of the $22,500. $1,500 for each athletic trainer. So that's $3,000. And then $7,500 should we need it for additional contact tracing throughout the year for additional hours worked by our nurses. If we don't have that much contact tracing going on between now and the end of the school year, that $7,500 would not be spent.
Thank you, Mrs. Ritchie. Thank you, Mr. Rudel. Any other questions or comments? May I have a motion to move forward with the transfers for the Board of Ed? Mr. Sini, second by Mrs. Parent. All those in favor? That is unanimous, minus Mrs. Hoffman. Thank you. We'll move on quickly to action items, personnel items. Mrs. Sion.
The personnel action report reflects the administrators, the appointments that you made earlier this evening, and a couple of retirements and a resignation.
So we have a motion to move forward the personnel action report. Mrs. Ritchie, second by Mrs. Parent. All those in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you. Michelle, good to be back to you with public comment.
Good evening. If you would like to speak during public comment, please click the participants icon on the bottom of your Zoom screen. When it is your turn to speak, the facilitator will identify you and announce that you are unmuted for public comment. You will have up to 3 minutes to comment. Ms. Teresa Vogt, you are unmuted and recognized.
Hi, Teresa Vogt, 22 Circle Road. Just want to go back to the beginning of the meeting when you were all talking about potentially getting rid of face masks at the school. I'd like to remind everybody that the CDC guidelines are that if you are unvaccinated, you should still be wearing a mask. And I would say the majority of the students in the district are not vaccinated, given that the entire elementary age population is not even eligible to be vaccinated. So why that was even a conversation is beyond me. And as the meeting was going on, we actually received an email from Alicia about a positive case and 17 people going into quarantine at Henway. The other thing I'd like to comment on is this broken record conversation regarding the use of the one-to-one devices. My son uses his device every day. My friends' kids use their devices every day. Their teachers are making use of the devices. I don't even understand why this is a conversation time after the same conversation over and over again. I don't even know why we need to keep talking about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Vogt.
Ms. Carolina Magui, you are unmuted and recognized.
Hi, this is Carolina Magoy, 28 Kensett Road, Lane actually, sorry. I just wanted to mention that, yes, equally, both my kids, a senior at the high school and an 8th grader at the middle school, use their devices pretty much every day. And have never really heard parents complain about the devices and not using them. I've heard of some that had issues with Chrome devices that were fixed quite quickly as well. So I'm not sure where the conversation comes from, the anecdotal conversation about computers and devices not being used at the school, because that's not what we have experienced. But that's about it. Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you, Mrs. McGoey.
There are no more raised hands at this time.
Thank you. May I have a motion to adjourn? Mr. Sini, second.